possible discussion this evening. And we are free to rearrange that order if the board members would like to speak to them in different order. And we don't really have a set time period. I think some of them will naturally go quicker than others. So is there a preference of one or ones to start with? Otherwise, I think we just go through the list as presented. Okay, just go through the list as we have it presented. So the first item for discussion, future ballot question for CIP project, discussion of interest in future ballot question to advance CIP projects to earlier time frames.
Yeah, so back in 2015, this is something staff had proposed to the board that was seated at that time. The thought is every year we have more projects that are needed than funding. It's just the way it's always been. And we've kind of had a pay-as-you-go philosophy in town where we fund the projects that we can each year and get them done. And it just causes some projects to get pushed out. Example is both pools need major renovations, the community park shelter and restrooms need renovations, but those have gotten pushed out because we have other needs that come up each year. There's a roundabout request or some kind of traffic signal or something at Indiana and McCaslin, and that's still out there a number of years. So we would be able to, if the board was interested in this, put together a list of projects, funding scenarios, and present them to you to see if it's something that maybe you'd want to consider for your future ballot measure to get some projects done sooner than they would just as a pay-as-you-go philosophy.
I think we could also wrap the Rock Creek Parkway discussion possibly into this, because that would be a CIP discussion, or maybe do this right after it. Like, no, don't do that.
No, I'm just struggling to understand why the Rock Creek Parkway would be part of the same CIP.
It would be a capital improvement project if we decided to do it.
Fair enough.
So it would require a good bit of money.
Yeah, I got you. The decision wouldn't necessarily be CIP driven.
Yeah,
capital
right.
improvement.
And it wouldn't, but to me, the criteria for the CIP, to me, I know it's a great list, Matt, by the way. The criteria to me are really twofold. Well, three. Obviously, things that are, because of Tabor, we'd have to bring to the ballot. And so when I think about what we're going to discuss later about Rock Creek Parkway, I don't think it's going to be so material that we wouldn't be able to figure it out within a budget. That's my suspicion. Yeah. As opposed to something like a traffic circle at Indiana McCaslin likely would. So the criteria for me are, number one, things that just would not be able to be budgeted in the capital budget. Number two, it's a safety issue, right? And safety issues for me should be top of the list. So if we think that there's a safety issue on Indiana McCaslin and we're gonna, we have the risk of losing a cyclist because of that, then we should accelerate those conversations. Safety, or, the pool is not up to some code due to, I don't know, it's a waiting or whatever. If there's a safety issue related to traffic or the pool, that's one thing. And then my third criteria would be if deferring the expense will make the expense in the future that much worse. In other words, if we could fix the pools need help, right? If we could fix the pools, I'll make up a number for $4 million in the next 3 years. That's one thing. But if we don't spend the $4 million in the next 3 years, then it's going to be $10 million in 10 years. Mm-hmm. That, to me, would be a good reason to have a CIP discussion. So I didn't understand the line item, but now that I understand the line item, I like it. And thinking about it, those would be my criteria. Material, so can't be afforded. Safety, or deferred cost would be so exorbitant that we should get ahead of it.
So, I think it's a good kind of framework for kind of analyzing the CIP projects in general. Just to take a step back, and also for the public who are watching this, here and then also at home. The proposal is we would contemplate not a mill levy increase, but a sales tax measure that would go to the voters in November that would authorize the town to raise funds by bonding, right? We would get bonds authorized and they would be paid for through the sales tax that would sunset after a period of time, I think 2 years or
It'd
Couple
be
years.
somewhere 10 to 20 years.
Oh, the bond would,
Yeah.
okay. And then that would allow us to do certain capital improvement projects sooner rather than later, right? And we've got a list, and we're going to be going through the budgeting process in the next month, and every time we go through that process, we always identify various projects that, you know, we've got a long laundry list of projects, McCaslin paving, you know, south of Rock Creek Parkway down to Colton Roundabout is one of them, right? And that's paving 88 for doing that project. That's another one. Doing the pools. So there's a number of capital improvement projects that we've got in the hopper, and we would pay for them over the course of the next 10 years and do them over the next 10 years, whereas this measure would allow us to do them over the next 2 to 3 years,
Right.
hypothetically, right? So the question is, do we want to go to the voters and ask them to authorize a sales tax increase of
0.25.
0.25%, which is less than what our open space tax is, 0.3%, for a limited period of time in order to authorize these expenditures. Right?
That's correct.
So in the memo, it did say a mill levy was being considered. It sounds like now we're just down to the sales tax.
Well, we would present those options to you. Sales tax typically has a better result
Sure.
in passing than a mill levy, but
Okay.
And would a third option also be this, there's a couple of mills that we just through board action can raise, we have the authorization to raise without a vote?
that's correct, yeah. I mean, the voter authorized mill levy is 12 point something mills, and we typically do a temporary tax reduction every year as part of the budget, and so to get us to the 7.95 I think we're at currently.
Right.
So you have those 4 mills basically. That's correct. Yep.
So that's just, I just want everybody to understand that that is another option. I mean, there's raising taxes, or voting, having public vote to raise it, but we do have this board, does have this authorization to raise mill levies to get things done too. And we've brought it down, but in theory, we can bring it back up if we wanted to advance these things. So to me, that should be considered just as strongly as.
I agree. Can you just, we're sure?
I mean, much the same way we authorize the purchase of Land Rover.
Right, but
Through board vote, and
So I think my concern with that approach, and I want to see it in the memo, I'd like to see it written out as the option. That way, A, all of us understand it clearly, but B, the public can see it and know that that
Right.
ability exists. My concern is we haven't been hearing from the public. I want you guys to go and get these CIP projects done that are in the out years done now. I mean, yes, for some of them, from contingents, but since we set expectations at a certain level of property tax, if we were going to all of a sudden jump that up 4 mills without thorough outreach and discussion, I'd be concerned about the blowback and just frankly the fact that we didn't have the public input on it. The vote, going to the voting mechanism certainly gives us that clear direction, and that's where I feel a lot more comfortable. But if we don't do that, at least thorough public outreach on it.
We need to.
and the prior board, we had some prior board members that were very much opposed to doing any kind of increase without a
Right.
vote of the public. So
Yeah.
that option kind of went out the window in prior boards during the last 5 years. So.
I think the fundamental issue is with whatever it is, whether it's board directed or voted, and capital improvement's not sexy. It's hard. It's a hard sell. I mean, if we're doing a tax increase by voters, how are we going to go advocate for the benefit? Because a retrofit to the pool, just no matter how you try to make it sound pretty, it's cash after, it's old cash.
You're fixing stuff.
You're fixing stuff. There's no new amenity that you can hang your hat on. Either way, I mean, I don't disagree that these things should be front and center on the capital improvement list, because the pools, I mean, the North Pool was built how long ago? Very long time ago, right? And we haven't, 20 plus years, we haven't poured any true capital into it. And it's, like you said, Kevin, I mean, it's probably starting to get to the point of where it's desperately needed. I'm definitely receptive to whatever mechanism is the most palatable to, the voters in town. But at the same time, I almost think we should try to find other ways of funding it, because trying to get, mill levy or a sales tax through is not going to be easy. I'm actually not a big fan of sales taxes because, right now our sales tax is relatively high compared to our neighbors. And the last thing we want to do is set, this burgeoning downtown endeavor somewhat behind our neighbors in terms of trying to attract business. But that's not to say that I want to find the cash. I just don't know that a tax is the best path right now.
The problem is when we go through the budgeting process, and I'm interested to see how this works, this go around. But you'll see that there's a lot of jockeying around the CIP projects, that things that have historically been scheduled in a certain way have a tendency to change, and then as the board changes, then they change with different board members' priorities, and that's fine. But kind of the net effect of that is that there's going to be those projects that are still important, that aren't sexy, that keep getting pushed to the end. And then I've been hearing from more people complaints about just the quality of the roads right now. I think this year more so than any other year that I can remember. And I mean, obviously we're doing something with Colton right now, and I think Alex was intentional about why we didn't do McCaslin this year, and why we're doing Colton, because we wanted to give everybody a break, because we've been working on McCaslin for so long, first with the roundabout and then with the paving of north of Rock Creek Parkway. So I think that was an intentional decision. But 88th is still a problem. Rock Creek Parkway is falling apart. A lot of portions of McCaslin need work. Colton desperately need to work. So I think if we just honestly went to the voters and said, hey, we hear you, and one way for us to solve this problem is to front load the capital improvement fund through a sales tax offering. Do you think that this is a good idea? And these are the sorts of projects that we would be using to fund it. I mean, that's a very, in my opinion, respectful and transparent way to go about governing if we're asking for funds. I'm generally not in favor of raising the mill levies. I think I like the direction that the board has been going in terms of every year reducing things, and now with the Metro District's debt being retired with SMD 2 and 3, with those bonds, those 20-year bonds being retired, we're going to have a pretty substantial, maybe $5 million reduction, right, for most of Rock Creek.
Which people, I don't feel like people have either recognized or appreciated or any of the above, and that's why I think bumping back up through our ability to do so with a vote is kind of a net wash for people. I hear you on your approach to telling people about projects, but I mean, from my experience with successful ballot initiatives to raise money, the ones that succeed are the ones that raise money for this thing or these things. Raise money so we can fix roads, those fail because it's too general, it's too squishy. It's like, oh, give us a pot of money and trust us. Well, people don't buy that.
That's why that's why I think I like the list of the pools. I mean, I do think, and I'm leaning towards, I agree with Clint, in terms of whether or not it's a mill levy increase or a sales tax increase. I think maybe a blend of the two, but if I was putting bets on one, which show I prefer over the other, I actually prefer the mill levy, not because I think about it as a mill levy increase. I think about it as this town has done a remarkable job managing the town's finances for a number of years, and we're about to see a decrease around, that will be pretty material. And I think Clint made this point a few months ago. Nobody's ever sent an email saying, thank you for, I just saw my tax bill, and thank you for the decrease in 5 mills. That email has never been received, and it never will be. Yet if we increase by 2.2 mills, then we'll get all kinds of emails saying, please don't raise my taxes. So we have the opportunity to be pretty net neutral. So I personally would be amenable to, I think what we're trying to do today is take the pulse, right? We can't make decisions, so trying to take the pulse so staff knows what to do. I'm amenable to continuing the discussion, particularly around mill levies. I like what Clint said around we're about to see this increase. If there's a way that we could manage to keep this relatively net neutral and tie it to a couple very specific projects that don't sound like, CIP, road maintenance, but sound like increased amenities. We're actually going to have locker rooms that don't feel dangerous. Things like that feel like things that me as a voter, I would want to know about, know where my millions of dollars are going, and vote on, and B, would appreciate, as opposed to, we're going to take this, we're going to raise your taxes, and we're going to continue to tear up the roads for the next few years.
Denver did a successful bond issuance for their Better Denver program a couple of years ago. And, part of that was, building big projects. The rec center that they built on Colton was one of them. But, part of it also was, fixing, parks that had been, kind of dilapidated. And they also fixed roads. And, they had a big public outreach program. They got people behind it, and the voters passed it. It was one of those questions where you asked the community to, invest in itself. And, even though Tabor is what it is, and it typically results in these bonding measures failing, we have the good fortune of living in Boulder County where people actually have the tendency to say, yes, I will invest in schools, I will invest in the fire department, I will invest in roads and bridges and infrastructure. So, I'm not necessarily convinced that if we went to the voters that it would fail. I think that, if we are transparent about, this is what it's going to look like, whether it's a mill levy increase or a sales tax increase or a combination of the two, and this is what it's specifically going to be used for. And, we can just tell the voters that what this is allowing us to do is basically deliver you, amenities and, better roads in a shorter period of time than we otherwise would. And if the voters say no, we still have the option of, and I wasn't aware that we had the flexibility within the existing mills to raise that. I guess we have that option, but I'm on the side of leaning towards asking the voters for permission.
So my concern is I don't want to go to the voters and lose. I want to make sure it's something we go and we've built a strong enough message. We've convinced the residents that it is something we need. I wish I was as optimistic as you are about this. I think it's going to be an uphill battle. I think, to Clint's point, no one sent us a thank you card. Frankly, I don't think people realize it because their taxes are still going up due to their property value issuance. So everyone's still seeing, I'm paying more this year. They might not realize they should be paying even more than they are, but that's why I don't think people are saying, hey, thanks guys, you're doing a great job, even though they probably should be. And so we already have that mindset, the taxes are high and they're going up already. But B, I think we're going to have an uphill battle due to the timing. We just spent $3.85 million, and I guess we will be soon when we close, on the former Land Rover building. There's going to be questions, why didn't you spend that money on what we truly need? You're telling me we need this stuff, and you guys went out and bought a building without coming to the voters? Are you kidding me? I think we're going to have some really strong public outreach material built up around this. And it's possible, I think we will, but there's going to be an uphill fight from the beginning on it. And if we're looking at what's most likely to be adopted by the voters, I think sales tax is probably more likely to be adopted than mill levy, just because, again, people have the mindset that their taxes are still going up, even if that's not necessarily the case from the town.
But don't you think that, I think that's a really good point, but don't you think that, you know, if the voters are concerned about, okay, we're spending $3.85 million on the Land Rover building, and then we don't go to the voters on a capital improvement ballot measure, I think rightfully so, then the voters are going to say, the hell are you guys doing? I mean, you're just spending taxpayer dollars without, you know, respectfully asking for permission. And, you know, so I think that in a situation like this, where, you know, we're going to make these capital improvements over the next 10 years, right? And we've got a list, and we know the Headworks is getting done this year, and then we're going to be doing the water, the drinking water next year, and then we're going to do Colton Road, and we're going to do McCaslin. You know, we've got this list. We know what it's going to cost, but we could actually deliver on these things, you know, sooner rather than later. And yeah, so we deliver on the ones that actually are going to affect people's lives on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, the pool improvements, if they need to be done, like, advance those. Advance, you know, some of the roads that people are traveling that people are always complaining about. You know, I'm sure we can put together a list of, you know, projects that I think voters will value and will appreciate, you know, seeing work done sooner rather than later. And I wouldn't want to see us advance those expenses now and, you know, spend all that money without going to the voters. I mean, if that's the case, then I would just say, let's just do the status quo and do it over the next 10 to 20 years. Like,
Well, don't misconstrue me. That wasn't what I was saying either. I still think we need to go to the voters. I don't feel comfortable raising our mills just because we have the ability to right now. But yeah, I'm with you. I'd like to do this.
So let's see if we can agree on something. Is there anybody that wants to put forward the argument that we should raise the mills back to the level that we can without going to the voters?
So one thing on that front is if we are going to do it either way, then I think we should just do it. I think it would be a lot worse if we go ask the voters, they say no, and then we say, well, we're using our power to raise taxes anyway.
I agree. I don't think.
So I want to make sure if we go to the voters, it truly is up to them, and if they say no, then we let it go.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I know you didn't mean it, you said if we lose, and I know you didn't mean it that way, but I don't, but it's not a win or lose, it's a, we're taking, you know, we're asking you.
Right.
And you, right, and so I agree with you. Then if they say no, then because then I guess we're back to the drawing board. That doesn't mean that we backdoor this in, it means the voters have spoken and we need to figure out a way without doing it. So is there anybody that thinks that we shouldn't take it
well,
to the...
hold on. The question that needs to be answered before that is, does anybody favor raising the mills now without it going
Yeah,
to the...
I guess that's what I'm saying.
Right. So like using the power...
question, right?
Okay, is that what that's what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, that comes down to how badly do we think we need these improvements now? I think to refute what Ken was saying earlier a little bit, we have heard from people about the roads and certain projects that they want moved up. It's certainly been just a few people that have sent emails about these things. But I think from our own pulse of the town, is this something we think people would be happy with if we, for example, built a roundabout at Indiana and McCaslin, or some of the other things that are due out in a couple of years?
Well, actually, the question is, I mean, what's the fastest we could even get this on the ballot?
We can get it on this year.
2020, right?
No, we can get it on this year.
To 2019.
Yeah, we have to give notice to BOCO clerk
Right.
in August.
It's a lot of work, especially if we're going to get, if it's the specifics of to improve, let's assume that, because I think it was Clint that made the good point. These things, people want to know what the money's being spent for. So, and I think as direct, that's logical, it's good counsel, right? And so I think we need, and just rule of three. Maybe 2 is right, maybe 4 is right, but let's just go with the rule of 3 for a minute. And so the top 3 projects, what are those top 3 projects? And they're likely, a major road reconstruction like McCaslin. It's likely enhancements to the pool. And then it's a third. And I don't know what that third is, but.
So I think technically we could get it onto this November ballot. Realistically, it ain't gonna happen because we will not get, I don't think we'll get our list finalized, and we certainly won't get education finalized. So back to your question of, would anyone here consider a mill levy? I would. And I would, because I think that's what we're elected to do. We're elected by citizens to make decisions to get things done. And if they don't like that, then they vote another crew in to do it differently. So I think that's what we were put here to do. I think this constant sending stuff to the ballot is just a way of saying, you know what, you put us here, but we really want you to decide it anyway. And I think there's a huge cost and time. There's a big cost and a big time in doing that. So we're looking at 2020. We're looking at big expense to come up with lists and sell it. And so I think if we truly believe that things need to be done, roads need to be paved, and locker rooms need to be fixed, we need to find the money and do it. And if people don't like the roads being paved and how we paid for it, then okay, then throw us out and get somebody else in here.
I think so for me, I'm not a definitive no, never. For me, it would be those criteria that I set. If it's a safety issue, so if, a locker room being gross is not a safety issue yet, right? But if the pool, it becomes a safety issue, or, it's not handicap accessible or something, then it's a completely different, then I would be with you. That's what they brought us here to do. Similarly, if it's a tough decision, spend $3 million now, or bring it to the voters and maybe you lose, and then at some point in the future it's 7 or 8, I would also be with you on that, right? But I don't have that type of, so I'm not quite as, if it's a spectrum, maybe I'm not quite, I don't fully understand where you are. I mean, I think I'm starting to understand. I might not be as far as you are in the spectrum, but I would certainly be willing to engage on certain projects where Matt and staff were saying this is necessary and required for the following reasons.
But I guess, so I think the fundamental question that needs to be answered is, are we okay with the status quo kind of timeline of like, are we going to be doing this in the ordinary course, pay for it as you go, or do we want to accelerate these projects? I think that's the kind of grounding question that we need to ask ourselves. And, some of us may be fine with the way we've been doing things and we'll just pay for them ordinarily. And that won't involve, a mill levy increase. It won't involve a sales tax increase. It won't involve going to the voters. We just make decisions. We prioritize things as we're elected to do. And now the question is, do we want to actually accelerate any of those projects? And if we do, then there's a couple different ways that we can go about doing that.
I think that's going to be a natural progression through the budgeting process when we see what we have the appetite and capability of doing, 2020, 2021. And if there's a shortfall, what do we want to do to try to accelerate some of that? Which becomes, the back half of 2019 discussion.
Yeah. I guess for me, I want to see, I'm open, but I want to see more detail on the projects, what you're talking about, what they're going to cost. I am not a supporter of doing it by a sales tax. I either want to do it, we put in the mill levy, or we take it to the voters on mill levy. But I want to have a better understanding of what we're talking, are we talking about $10 million, $50 million, and really having a good sense from staff of what it's going to cost. Is McCaslin more important than 88th? Not in my opinion, it's not. But I don't know what you're talking about, whether you're talking about doing both, whether the roundabout's in there up in Indiana. So I kind of want to see more, but I personally would be interested in having you bring the concept of the CIP projects and how could we finance it? Would it be mills? But I am opposed to sales tax.
And that would be the next step, just exactly what you said there. Didn't want to have staff spend a bunch of time on putting together a project list and funding scenarios and all that if the board just wanted to continue. But there seems like there might be some interest to continue to talk about it and look into it. Then we'll definitely put that list together and funding scenarios, give that information to you.
I would especially want to see staff's perspective on which initiatives do they think ought to be pulled up.
Okay.
You mean which project or or how to fund it?
Which specific project?
Which specific project?
Yes.
And I think that's what I was trying to say too.
So, I agree. I want to know what the projects are going to look like, how much they're going to cost, and, how important, how critical they are, and kind of like the case to be made for why it makes sense to accelerate them versus, keeping them on the traditional schedule. However, I think we should consider doing the ballot question. So like, to the extent that we can put this list together, get the information to the board, you know, the raising the funds and putting together a ballot question like this, I don't think is a really difficult, you know, kind of legal question for the town's attorney to put together. You know, just should voters, you know, raise X number of dollars through a sales tax increase of 0.3% or a mill levy increase of, you know, 5 mills, you know, to expire in whatever, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You know, that language is all, you know, pretty standard. And then it's just, this is what the list is going to be of the capital improvement projects that would be funded from the proceeds of that sales tax increase or mill levy increase. I mean, if we're going to do it, I think we should just be prepared to do it, rather than, you know, talk about it now and then forget about it and then say like, okay, well, let's go forward to 2020, when the ballot in 2020 is going to be a very different ballot than the ballot's going to be in 2019. It's going to be a very packed ballot. It's going to be a presidential election.
Matt, how quickly would staff be able to identify which are the projects, at least even the ones through 2023?
I think we could, since we have a list that we did back in 2015, we'll go back and update that, update the funding information and financing information, and get something to you pretty quickly, actually.
Because, I mean, my thinking is if we have at least what are the projects that we think ought to be pulled forward, what's the budget, which should already be roughly calculated for it, then that might be a good time for us to then discuss, do we want to pull this forward or not, before we make you go to the work of drafting ballot language and identifying funding.
Yeah, because I'm falling in league with Clint. I think that I would just as soon not put it on the ballot. We've got this 5 mills we're getting ready to retire. The timing would be perfect if we wanted to go back and say.
Well, it already has retired. I mean, it's
Yeah.
already happened.
Yeah, I mean, but for most people,
Yeah.
they're not thinking about it yet.
Well, as Ken said, I mean, the taxes went up due to property values
Yeah.
went up, so nobody noticed it.
But
'cause it
nobody,
was-
you know, is,
Yeah.
but the fact that our rate has gone down.
Yeah.
And so if we even were to use that 5 and just say, hey, we've got these projects we really want to get done, we're going to put this in place, it's going to only be here for another 5 years or 3 years or whatever it is, I would hate to have it go on a ballot and lose. And this way we know we could get the money. And it wouldn't be any more hit to residents than they're accustomed to getting from us.
I think, as always, timing is important. I'd feel a lot more comfortable going the direction that you guys are proposing of using what we're currently authorized to do. Once we get past the first of the year, when Rocky Mountain is supposedly going to finish their merger with Mountain View, and our residents are going to see another 4 to 5 mil decrease in their taxes. I mean, that's not our mills, but it's something our residents will see and they will feel. If I know that our residents are continuing to see drops elsewhere, I might be a little bit more comfortable moving forward with our current authorities.
I guess my just general take is, I recognize that we may be authorized to do something, but just because we're authorized to do something doesn't mean we should do something or that it's right. And to me, taxes are such a personal issue. I mean, nothing gets people more riled up than taxes. I just think like, if we're going to do something that's kind of deviating from what we're typically doing, right, like historic norms, I think we owe it to the voters to ask them, even if we have the legal authority to do it currently under what's already been authorized, this is something different. We're changing gears from what we've done historically, and I think if it's going to be a big dollar amount in terms of like the total projects here, you know, we're talking $50 million. I don't know what the project is going to look like, but I think in a situation like that, we've got to go to the voters.
I think we're not making a decision here, we're just taking the pulse. And so it sounds like, you know, if we're doing the spectrum, it sounds like some would be harder than others to convince. Your hurdle to be convinced is going to be pretty high, obviously. So stated on that, but I think others of us have signaled that bar maybe is high, but maybe not quite as high as yours. So, but it sounds like, I mean, Matt, did you get what you need from us?
I do, yeah.
Okay, and then we'll have a kind of a rigorous debate, but for 2019, no acceleration, nothing in 2019. Is there anybody, just before we move off that, don't want to move, and then somebody says, wait a minute, don't we want to do something in 2019? Nothing in 2019, right? Nobody wants to accelerate.
You're talking about to the voters?
Yeah.
I do.
Mark does. I heard him say that.
Yeah, I mean, when you consider what's going to be on the ballot in 2020, it's either 2019 or 2021. I don't want to be trying to go to the voters in the scope of everything else that they're going to have to decide in 2020, not to which, three of the board members. Trying to squeeze this in 2020 is just not worth it in my mind. There's going to be road signs from here till, Broomfield. So, if we don't want to do it now, and I'm actually falling into Mark's camp here, where, if we know the projects, 2 to 3 projects, 3 to 4 projects, whatever it is, and we can define what to do, how much it's going to cost, scope that out, with a 3 to 5 year bill. Maybe it's not that complicated. Maybe we can, push this thing through. Because I do agree, any and all tax increases, especially ones that are discretionary, I mean, there's a true trade-off here that can be measurable. A lot of things this town has to spend money on, people don't necessarily see why we're spending the money here, but this is going to be a very measurable improvement, arguably, to their lives. And it's ultimately, if they don't approve it, then it just goes into the standard, budgeting process, and it might be a 10 to 20 year time period. Ultimately, that's a message we need to hear from the voters. We agree with the, supporting this mill levy, and we agree to the degree that we're going to vote it in 2019, so the board, the town can accelerate these 3 capital improvement projects, or they say no, and they just fall into whatever schedule we decide we have as part of the budgeting process. Because I think you're right. I mean, I think, when it comes to taxes, even if it's $1, I think this town has done a phenomenal job in reducing mill levies, as you look at other towns have not. And I think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in spite of it just being road improvements, maybe the voters will surprise me and say, that is sexy. I do want to do it because it will, increase the life of my car.
So before we have the conversation of should we or shouldn't we do in 2019, can we have this discussion of can we? I know that we can get something on the ballot. Matt, do you guys have the bandwidth to even try to do this in such a abbreviated period of time?
Yeah, it's, the engagement part of it, that along with Land Rover.
Which we will be doing massive engagement with at the exact same time.
Right. And we fail. Right. I mean, that's what I worry. I mean, I think we all generally agree that if you bring it to the voters and if the ballot measure fails, right? I mean, we fail, the ballot measure fails, then you're up a creek, right? Because you don't want to bring it back the following year. You can't, nobody here would want to just slide it in because the voters spoke, right? So that would be difficult. I agree. I mean, mechanically, we could probably do it, particularly if using Mark's example, it's a 1 paragraph, we're increasing to this for capital improvement projects, which may include X, Y, and Z, right? That's not the specific that I would want to see around. We want, we have the following 3 projects, which would include pool improvements, specific projects, which will take us longer. We can't do that in August because I think that would be impracticable.
Yeah, so, I mean, Land Rover's the big factor here, is that they're going to get combined into one, and it's like, oh, you're raising taxes for that, to do that, and it's going to get. We brought that into the mix, so we got to deal with that. But okay. I just think that mechanically, I think yes, we could get it done. We could get it on the ballot. But I think the realities of what we're going to be dealing with is just going to be a tough sell. It's an odd thing where we don't require a vote to lower taxes, so we give us the budget to take it back. We want to always have a vote. So it's a strange kind of thing.
realistically, I don't yet see a need to push this onto the 2019 ballot. I mean, we haven't heard a major outcry of, hey, there's all this stuff we have to get done. I think it's great if we can pull some things forward, but I mean, Matt, I would defer to you a little bit on this. Are there projects that you know of that are top of mind that you're saying, wow, we really need to get this done as soon as possible?
I'd have to go back.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I
mean,
guess I'm just thinking,
there's just so
if
many
they're not
projects.
top of mind as we desperately need this, then I don't think we ought to rush and try to get it done in the next month.
Well, that's why, let me get the list to you. And we'll have estimated budget numbers on there, we'll have financing. I think, in a week or two, we can get that to you, so, and then you'll have a better idea.
I mean, if we knew we weren't going to have water in 2019
Right.
or 2020, then I think we'd all be going, oh yeah, let's get it on the ballot. But I don't want to see us rush it, and because we didn't have time to roll it out properly, particularly with the other things we've got going on this fall, not only Land Rover, but we're trying to do engagement for Happy City, and we've just got a lot of things that and a bunch of development projects coming our way. I really would hate to see us rush it.
One just, kind of contrarian view on this is, obviously we gotta like to get things done, to make decisions for the voters. When we do get questions from time to time, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Like the roads are falling apart over here. This is asking the voters, okay, do you want us to prioritize this? Do you want us to accelerate these projects? And if they say no, and then we hear, in a year or two, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? You're going to say, well, you remember that ballot question that you had in 2019 and you voted no for it? Well, had you voted yes, that would have given us the opportunity to accelerate these things, and it at least provides, direct democracy, right? It gives them the opportunity to have a say in, their own destiny. So, I've said my piece. I think you know where I stand on this, but I think it's something we should consider.
Great, let's get the list. Okay, resume. Okay, next item is board goals. This is just a mid-year review of the work completed towards our 2019 board goals.
This was something I asked Matt to add on, and really, we have these 6 high-level 2019 board goals that aren't necessarily measurable in and of themselves, so I wanted to at least make sure that everyone kind of sat down, and actually I took the time to think about, are we making the steps towards these goals that everybody envisioned, or with less than half of the year remaining, is there anything else we want to try to prioritize during this time period to ensure that we are actually meeting the intent of what we set out to do at the onset. I'd be happy to kick it off since I brought it up. I think looking at going to the bottom of the list, the support environmental sustainability, I think we have a lot of improvement areas that we can continue to work on, and I'll bring that up again in another agenda item, our next one actually. But we have a committee, we have ACES right now that has lots of ideas, and I think based off my observations over the past 5 years, they're a committee that has not necessarily gained the traction that they probably should have. And I think that we as a town should be moving in the direction that we can to become as environmentally sustainable as possible and to do our part to more or less be as resource conservative as possible. I think we can talk about the landscape that we have here. I think we can talk about our town events and whether we could go to zero waste events. I mean, there's a lot of ideas. I'd like to see where we go with these next couple agenda items to push that over the edge, and then going into next year, I'd like to see a little bit more encouragement of ACES to bring these ideas to the forefront and actually push them forward.
Others?
But I think, it'd be interesting to do a little scorecard, right, on each of the goals, because I think, Matt, was helpful to kind of list out the list of achievements, and we've had a lot of achievements, right? And we've had a lot of success, but, I think we all have areas where we're frustrated, right? I mean, I think we've improved around the public engagement process, but there's still surprises all the time. I mean, I think we need to continue to improve. I think we have, the omni-channel approach is not working, right? We have too many things out there right now, and we need to, because there's something this week that I spent more time than I wanted to trying to figure out where some messages were. So I think we need to improve public engagement. I think around the public service and infrastructure, I continue to be frustrated. I know that the economy is good, and I know there's a lot of development projects, but I know being a flagger may be the worst job on a construction site, but for me, it's one of the most important jobs on a construction site, because that's really where you're engaging the community, and it's a safety issue. And I continue, up to and including today, to be frustrated around construction projects and the fact that it just feels like it's a surprise to the people that are working in a construction project. Right? I mean, roads are never closed. We've all been to places where roads are really well closed, and things are zoned off, and there's flaggers. And maybe you're frustrated because you slow down too much, but it's certainly not a public safety issue. I am constantly running into public safety issues when we do construction in town, up to and including today on Colton, where I have no idea where cyclists are supposed to go. There's no signage. It's just unacceptable. And I'm sorry I didn't give you a heads up on that, Matt, today, but it was only half an hour before I came to the meeting, right? I mean, that's just not, if we state that, safety must be on here somewhere, but we talk about public infrastructure, we talk about community engagement. We're doing better, but I appreciate I think it was a good suggestion to make it a mid-year review. And, if Ken would give us maybe a C+ on sustainability, I'd probably give us a B- on public engagement and infrastructure, which is better than I think we were, but it's not where I want us to be.
I would agree with Kevin. The one that I wanted to bring up was that public engagement and outreach and marketing. I think bringing up the omni-channel approach is a good one. I think right now we're doing it a little bit too much, assuming everyone has access to every channel. So we're saying, oh, we just posted it on Facebook yesterday, so we're not going to email it for a couple of days, rather than taking an underlying assumption that just assume that everybody's only on one of them, and let's get it all out there as soon as possible. One thing, Matt, I know that you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I haven't discussed with the rest of the board. I'd really like to see when we have an announcement about something, whether it's a road closure or whether it's an event, let's send that out as soon as we know about it. Example is the disc golf tournament this week. I know we just sent that out on Sunday. I think it would have been much better if we had sent it a month ago saying this is coming, then this week sent another reminder saying, hey, don't forget, because otherwise people already have their plans if we're sending it last minute. So really, I just favor over communicating, and then if people still don't get the message, then that's on them. With regard to the construction and such, one thing I would really like to see us start doing is, as much as possible, depending on how our resident email lists are segmented, try to reach out to residents ahead of closures and let them know what's going on. I just had this on my street this week where it's closed off. There are well-marked detours, but everyone on the street had no idea it was going to be closed off or what's happening. So I actually, on my way to the meeting today, kind of drove around seeing what's the extent of the closure and where can I go and where can't I go, versus I think just a quick email saying, hey, this street's closed, that street's closed. I think that might go a long way with residents.
One other piece just that goes with that, I've been going around talking to everyone in my neighborhood since I live right off of Cold Creek, and we just adjusted the speed limit down to 25 miles per hour, asking people what they thought of it. Nobody has any idea that we just did it. Yep. It's been posted for a couple weeks now. Nobody looks at the signs because they've been driving by it for 3, 4, 5, however many years that they've lived there. If we can actually get like a flashing construction sign out that says,
or we can put flags on the signs.
I mean, just something that Not permanent, nothing that's
No, yeah.
there permanently, but just communicate to everyone who drives that road, hey, we have a new speed limit, because I don't think anybody notices. at
Or
all.
again, even just an email heads up saying,
Yeah, well,
you know,
I
didn't
mean-
notice anything new, you might have missed it, but we dropped the speed limit, pay attention.
I'm more concerned about actually getting on the road, just because you're actually driving.
Both.
But
I
yeah,
think
no, I'm fine
both,
with that.
yeah.
So, when I first got on the board, I was probably one of the most cantankerous at the board retreats when we started talking about the goals, because I just thought that they were so wishy-washy and amorphous, and to Ken's point, not measurable, right? And so what I was always trying to do is say, okay, what under each of these goals are some examples of some specific identifiable, projects and things that we can actually execute on, that we can deliver on, so we can actually measure ourselves against those goals and see if we're actually delivering. And so we can give staff direction that, like, okay, these are the sorts of things that we would do to make us more sustainable and make our communications better. And when I think about it from the perspective of, and I think that the staff memo, Matt, is really good in this regard. If you think about it, the big ticket items that we're doing, like, I'm actually more proud of this board than I've ever been. I think that we're doing some really big things, and I'm really encouraged about the direction that we're going, right? You think about, like, the oil and gas issue that we're dealing with right now. We've got a moratorium in place. We're adequately protecting the health and safety of the public. And we went down to the Capitol to advocate on behalf of our residents to help Senate Bill 181 get passed. It got passed. Now we're going to have the ability to implement ordinances and regulate these things to better protect public health and safety. So that is something that I think the board has really prioritized. We recognize the importance of it, and we've been executing on it. And I'm really excited to see kind of the direction we go with the ordinances that we ultimately will consider and hopefully adopt. But I think we need to press forward on that. But we're already going in the right direction with that. When you look at where we're going with open space acquisitions, right now we're moving towards potentially acquiring the CenturyLink property, which has been like the #1 priority for OSAC forever. First it was a level 3 property, now it's a CenturyLink property. We've got an appraiser going on, we're going to hear what the appraisal thinks in the next week or so, and hopefully we'll be moving forward and acquiring that. If we can actually acquire that or a portion of that, that is going to be one of the things that I'll be most proud of for this board, because that's just such a defining piece of property for just the nature of this community, the look and feel of it. Just there's so few parcels, and the voters already authorized us to acquire the open space that we can, and we're doing it. We purchased the Bridge 2 property. It's not open space, but it's not going to get developed, and it gives us the flexibility to expand the water treatment plant. I think the Land Rover purchase is going to be the opportunity for us to actually deliver on like an actual civic space amenity for the community. I'm so excited about it. Was it on our radar at the beginning of the year? No, but I mean, this is one of those things that kind of arose, and I'm really excited that we're doing it. I think we've hired a really good economic development consultant. That's been a point of frustration for me in the past with our previous consultant. Now we've got one who's actually reporting to us. He's got leads that he's chasing. And we've got new businesses that are investing in the marketplace. And so, I think that's, we're moving in the right direction there. Culturally, with the things that CAP's doing, with the Happy City Consultant, with the Main Street event, I think we're starting to really prioritize building like an identity here in town, which is sorely needed. At the back half of this year, we're going to have a lot of really significant development plans with Thrive, with Toll Brothers, with Morgan Ranch, downtown Superior. Those are going to be critical issues, but part of that, and this is another kind of point of contention that we've had for a number of years, developing, getting a commitment on the civic space development that Branch Capital has agreed to provide for us, and we're going to see that, and we're going to finally see the commitment from that $10 million for the civic space component, and then the balance of that can then be used for the additional parks that they're going to be improving, and hopefully we'll see parks 1 and 2 shortly thereafter. So I think like all of these things, coupled with the board's desire to revisit the comprehensive plan, budget for that next year. I think, when you look at like these kind of big deliverables, I'm really encouraged. Yeah. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely, there always is. I think we can do a better job with communications and making sure that we're getting the word out, especially about construction projects. Anytime we have like a road closure or something like that, we need to let people know what's going on. If there are people who are violating our code, and what's going on in original town is really unacceptable in terms of what everybody in original town has had to deal with over the past couple of months. You're welcome. And I'm sorry, but these are the sorts of things that we need to be more responsive to and make sure that the code's being followed. And on the communication side of things, like I'm glad we tried new avenues of outreach with Google groups and with Reddit, and you never know what's going to take. The CAC listserv is being used less and less. A lot more people are using the Facebook groups, which aren't town run. So I think it was worthwhile to see if these other they didn't cost us anything. It's not like we purchased a bunch of licenses to use some new technology, but it's worth it to try it out. And I applaud the board's willingness to try to see if one of those things would take. You never know. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I'm encouraged. I don't necessarily think that there's anything that I really want to highlight other than at the back half of this year, I think we need to focus our time on the Land Rover acquisition and kind of the rollout of how that's going to turn into a community-centered amenity for the community, and then really all the development applications that we're going to have dealing with Town Center, because those are going to be absolutely critical, and there's going to be a lot of resident interest because when we're talking especially about like the Toll Brothers application, that's right up abutting the neighborhood on the hill. So we're going to make sure that we need to honor the promises that were made to the community and the agreements that were struck previously.
Okay, good summary. Anything further on goals?
And our skate park is awesome. That's the
Yes. All right, let's go on to future landscape plan, discussion of the board's interest in adopting a long-term plan to transition to more natural, sustainable landscaping.
So this is another one that I brought up and requested Matt to add to the agenda. When we approved the Vargas contract earlier in the year, this was something I discussed at that point, whether we could start transitioning into less resource-intensive landscaping. I think 20 plus years ago, when Rock Creek was built, you didn't necessarily have the environmental concerns, resource concerns that people have now. I think times have changed. I know we have a lot of people who live in Superior, specifically because of the way it looks and the aesthetics that we provide. But I think there's ways that we can manage our landscape in a more responsible manner that we don't actually lose the aesthetic value that we have. It'll just be a different, more sustainable aesthetic value. This is something that ACES has discussed at certain times over the past year. And specifically, I think there's ways that we could go about doing this in a non-capital intensive as far as a single year, but spread it out over multiple years and start in areas that are kind of low-hanging fruit that won't impact people on a day-to-day basis. So maybe say, well, not that they utilize on a day-to-day basis, so medians, corners of intersections, those areas. So we start making changes there, get the community feel, see if people are liking it, see what it looks like, and then as we go forward with those, take on more areas, such as we have a lot of places in between homes that are basically drainage areas that are nothing but grass. And behind lots of houses, we have manicured grass that abuts McCaslin, for instance. What value and utility is manicured grass adding to our community there? Can we transition that to more natural grass? I mean, there's a lot we can do, and what I've heard from ACES and what I personally feel is that it's responsible for us to start moving in that direction. So my hope with this topic is to get the feel of the rest of the board and see if we can give staff direction to start building a long-term 4 or 5 year plan to start implementing these types of changes.
Yep, thanks for putting this on, Ken. And I would agree, you first mentioned medians, as a kind of a first area, and I couldn't agree more. You know, I these little narrow strips of grass, and then I see the guys struggling to get the lawnmowers up there, and there's no traffic direction, getting these lawnmowers across the street. I think it's incredibly dangerous. I mean, every week, you know, during the summer. So I would love to see nothing more than the elimination of grass that's got to be mowed in medians. You know, I mean, particularly the really narrow ones, and particularly McCaslin, where it's incredibly dangerous to be taking a lawnmower across McCaslin to mow. So yes, I would be supportive of moving in this direction and start with the grass in the median.
Yeah, I think I echo it as well. Rock Creek, I mean, we noticed this through the election because it's a really easy place to stick your signs and all these little manicured patches of grass in between, you know, the roads. But there's absolutely, because I've seen the Vargas guys out there, like you said, every week, Rock Creek, it's just not, I mean, we shouldn't be creating an unsafe, I mean, basically an unsafe position for our contractors to be in, and that's what this town has with both roadways. You know, and then of course, you know, if you start talking grass versus, you know, all the other things, given that this is Colorado, grass is probably the last thing you should be putting in a median, given how much water it requires and how much maintenance it needs. I'd love to replace all that with, you know, anything other than grass, you know, as quickly as possible. You know, and then beyond that, I think as Kenneth alluded to, I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves really, you know, given the issues, I mean, 30 years ago, green grass was an automatic. You know, now the HOA is definitely helping to try to encourage everyone to replace the grass in their front yards and, you know, more xeriscaping. I think we've got to be realistic with ourselves in terms of, you know, is that something this town is amenable to? I think a lot of people do really like the golf club green. It's incredibly expensive and hard to maintain. Vargas does a phenomenal job. But, you know, if nothing else, what I learned through the Riverbend engagement is, you know, we got to be really careful. This is people's backyards.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, changing anything in the backyards or, you know, what a home abuts to is not necessarily something we can do overnight or even, you know, over a long period of time. But it is worthy to start having a conversation with the broader community about the amount of time and energy it takes to maintain the land. But I think it's a worthy discussion to start having.
Yeah, so I don't object to having a discussion about it. I just, you know, we got to be careful that we're not, you know, it's super easy to say, oh, it's so expensive to have grass. But what's the expense? I want to be very thoughtful about it. What's the expense of pulling out the grass? And, you know, we're going to let it go back to some type of native. And if it's potable water anyway, you know, are we, you know, the irrigation's there and it's potable water, it's going to be irrigated anyway. I mean, what is the true, sometimes, you know, we use the goofy plastic straw example. You know, it felt like a great thing that we should get rid of straws, but now there's, you know, more, and I don't know what's current, right? But there are people that are arguing that, you know, the paper straw instead of the plastic straw, it didn't really move the needle for any environmental damage, and we're all getting pretty frustrated with the paper straws that are falling apart, and you're getting more of them, and maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. Before we do anything, I want to make sure that it's well thought out. And I don't remember getting a proposal from ACES to say, hey, I want to try, and if they had a proposal to us, if they took it to the board and had a public meeting and said, we want to remove the grass from this particular median, and we want to consider the cost impact over the next 12 months, and maybe consider the safety impact, and could you, board, support us in this endeavor? Of course we'd say yes. So we haven't stopped them from doing anything.
No, and they have not come to us with that. It's been discussions they've had internally trying to educate themselves, and I don't think the conversation has blossomed up further. They've had staff come in and give them presentations on a landscape plan. They've done what they can to educate themselves, and they've just had other topics, environmental vehicle infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure, that they've prioritized above that over the past few meetings.
Right. We just need to really think about the no-brainer ones around, you know, medians may sound like the no-brainer, but if somebody drives by that median and it turns into, I mean, there are a few areas, you know,
weeds starting to pop up across the street, across from the Tesla building. You know, that building is not being very well maintained. And you see what can happen in only a few months when landscape is not very well maintained. It's starting to look kind of abandoned. I don't want our medians, I will not be supportive of anything that makes our medians look weed-ridden and abandoned.
Which not my intent. My intent is there are ways to do it so it's still aesthetically pleasing. And when I say resources, I'm not necessarily talking about town monetary resources. I'm talking about the use of water, the actual natural resources that we plow into all of our landscaping. There's a lot we do that's not necessarily environmentally friendly or sustainable, and that's the direction.
Right, and I totally agree with that, but if we have the potable water anyway, and it's not drained, and it's non-potable, excuse me,
Yeah.
the non-potable water anyway,
Yeah.
and it's not draining our town resources, that's why I just want to be very thoughtful about it and make sure that.
Agreed. Well, and I'm not trying to say, let's give staff to go do it right now. What I'm hoping to get out of tonight is, let's see if there's enough of a pulse from the board to at least consider this and have staff drop a plan that meets the criteria.
So I personally don't want, this is why we have I like our committees. We tend to go with the committees every time. I think if the committees want to have a proposal for consideration, but I think staff's got a lot going on. I think they do a remarkable job balancing the needs between, you know, super golf club-like aesthetically appealing landscaping, which I agree can sometimes be over the edge. At the same time, you know, I was in Purple Park last night, and that grass hasn't been cut. I mean, it's just long, and I know it's been particularly rainy, but, you know, it was just too long. But I do think staff is balancing. It's not like they're out there every day with, you know, lawnmowers emitting into the ozone. I mean, it feels like there is some balance here. So if, for me, Bases wants to propose something, I'm all ears, but I don't think we can or should make it a priority to staff at this point.
I have to agree with Kevin on this. I mean, if the fact that ACES has deprioritized it in favor of other initiatives, I don't think we ought to then say, hey, have staff drop a plan to take it to ACES.
Well, I don't think it's accurate to say deprioritized it.
You said that they had other priorities that were ahead of it, correct?
Well, we all have priorities, but that doesn't mean I'm deprioritizing something. Just means that right now they decided they only get so much time in front of the board. Electric vehicles is what they wanted to talk about. They don't see this as any less of a priority, but
they chose to talk about electric vehicles.
Well, you only can get in front of the board so often.
Oh, totally agree, but that's where it sounds like electric vehicles is the priority. So I'm with Kevin that when this becomes their priority, then definitely I want to hear about it because it sounds.
So just because they chose to come to us and talk to us about electric vehicles doesn't mean this is not a good initiative or it's not something we should ignore. And I agree, we absolutely need to listen to our committees. We have them for a reason, but that doesn't mean we can't have good ideas filter up from other places, especially because we actually, if you go back and you read the ACES minutes, you'll see that this is something they have discussed and they are wanting to push forward and make improvements on. It just isn't the number one. It's probably in the top 2, 3, or 4. I don't want to speak for them, but if I were to guess based off the conversations, that's probably where it lands. And based off my pulse of the community, we've seen lots of different Facebook posts about how unsustainable our landscape is. I've had people come and talk to me specifically about our landscape. Usually it has to do with weed management and the use of Roundup, but they always touch on, hey, by the way, have you noticed that we have a drought here? Have you noticed that we have climate change? Have you noticed we have all this other stuff? Why the heck are we Superior, a town, still plowing so much resources into landscaping that might have been a good idea 20 years ago?
And just as an electric vehicle owner, I have not ever asked to have more places to plug my car in within this town. I have my garage, and it satisfies 100% of what I need. I'm actually not a fan of taxpayer resources going to charge my car up. So, I mean, to the degree that we can help educate ACES on, you know, the broader community needs, I'm a little.
Well, and they'll be in front of us 2 meetings from now to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant to, you know, sort of accelerate something that benefits the few versus thinking about, you know, landscape management.
And that's why they want to come talk to me. They're not trying to push it until they hear from us.
So I think it's a good idea to have this conversation now, and I think, this is the type of like long-term strategic thinking and strategic planning that, it's important to have, right? We didn't develop Superior, we didn't develop Rock Creek, but now we're managing it, and we're trying to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars and of the environment and of, all sorts of responsibilities that we have. I think with respect to, you go down to a place like Santa Fe, you go down to a place like Scottsdale, Arizona, and they have some like absolutely beautiful, medians, and they're in the middle of a desert, right? So, and we are a high plains basin. We're essentially a desert, and there's no real reason why we should have as much grass here as we have, but we have it, right? And I agree. I mean, a starting point, right? The low-hanging fruit is, these medians that. But to me, that's really a safety consideration for Vargas and for the people who are maintaining it, and just kind of the logistics of trying to maintain those things versus the grand field at Purple Park, which would be a much different question. But I think it's one of those things that to the extent that we're thinking about how this town is going to evolve over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, we absolutely should be thinking long term about xeriscaping when we can, and putting in less water intensive plants into wherever we're going to be planting, because we typically need to replace trees and on a regular basis, plants on a regular basis. So when we're doing those plantings, and I know we're already doing it, to some extent, we're making sure that a lot of those plants are not as water intensive as others. But yes, to the extent that ACES wants to come to the board and say, these are the things that we recommend that the board take into consideration, I'm all ears for that sort of thing, so.
Okay. Anything else? All right, let's,
Do we want to, are we avoiding the roundup conversation?
I was going to say, so where did we land on that?
That's the
that's
next one.
weeds. That's D, item number D, weed management.
So I asked for this one to come on to the agenda. So I've had a number of conversations with residents. Monsanto just got a jury verdict against them for hundreds of millions of dollars for the use of Roundup. Litigation is one thing, but at any rate, there are legitimate health concerns that our residents have about the use of Roundup. I recognize that we use it as a kind of last resort to deal with certain areas that are just tough to deal with. But I think I can't recall if we have ever on the board. I know that ProStack considers the weed management plan, I think annually.
Yep.
But I don't know if this question has ever come before the board, not since I've been on the board. So I thought it would make sense for the board to at least have a discussion. And my suggestion would be for us to pilot a 1-year experiment of let's not use Roundup. And, let's see if we could use some alternatives. And, if we end up having a weed-riddled town that doesn't necessarily meet our residents' expectations, then we revisit it. But Boulder, Durango, CU Boulder, they've all gone Roundup free. And I think that Superior should be, leading with those types of, jurisdictions and entities that are, making different decisions on, the use of, weed management processes that don't involve Roundup, because it is a carcinogen.
Patrick, can you just, welcome. Can you just talk to us a little bit about kind of the current staff policy?
Yep.
I know there's some memos on it, but what our current policy is around Roundup.
Yeah, so we, as Mark mentioned, we do use it. It goes in rock beds. So it's when you see us treating things like 88th Roundabout, the rock surfaces on McCaslin. We use a completely different product for the grass surfaces. We do try to actually manage it as a last resort. We always do a pre-emergent, that's in the contract. and then we water. Those are our two best solutions. If we notice that something's gonna bloom out of control, like with dandelions, we just actually kind of let those be. And, we'll get kind of a handful of complaints where you guys will see it in Purple Park and Founders Park. When we see something that obviously, the tough thing about a weed is by the time it pops up, you've missed it. And we either will pay to hand pull it, or, which can be expensive and we do a lot of, or we'll go and we'll spray it, which is quicker and not as expensive. So, we did ask Vargas to pull up some other options. There are more organic solutions that are more expensive, and they tend to be more expensive because you have to use more of it to get the same result. But yeah, there's absolutely opportunities out there. It predated me a little bit, Martin might remember. We did a test in maybe 2011 when Alan Macbeth was still here, and we did kind of some test patches where we did organic, and I think at that time it was kind of a mixed result. In terms of, we've talked about maybe doing some test areas. The concern we have is weeds and playing surfaces. But again, if we're kind of talking only the glyphosate, and there seems to be some comfort with the other stuff we're using, it's going to mostly be the rock beds. So.
And I guess, my concern is, to the extent that we're talking about playing surface, I think that's like another reason. It's one thing if we're talking about roundabouts and, rock beds that people aren't necessarily playing on, but if we're talking about, fields that kids are rolling around on, I don't want glyphosate sprayed on that.
And we don't. It's a completely different. The only thing that the glyphosate goes on is a spot spray on like a median.
Okay.
We use something completely different for park surfaces. And that, when we were kind of doing the research, that's consistent with Durango and Boulder, is that it was, active park spaces where people would interact with the grass. That's where they're not using it. And they, we patterned, and again, I might have to rely on Martin, we kind of patterned our integrated pest plan off of what Durango was doing at the time, which was, really trying to manage it and use it as a last resort. And then I probably could have done a little bit better job pointing out, a lot of times, even if we're close to people's back fences, because we do have residents who have self-selected to be on a list where we can't spray near their properties. So that's where you'll see us do like these weird mowing patches in the open space, or you'll see, 5 or 6 Vargas guys all show up at once and they hand pull and they go. And that's how we kind of treat those areas. But yeah, we're absolutely open to trying, other options as well. I think everybody's trying to trend away from it. And as you guys were talking about the rock beds, that's definitely something to think about, is those are the ones that we get the weeds in. But yeah, we definitely don't use it in grass where people interact.
Yeah, so my recommendation, I want to hear from the board, but what I would like to see is just kind of, what would Vargas, what would the budget look like, if we kept the status quo, like this is what we're doing today, versus going to a more, eco-friendly, non-glyphosate program, so we can understand kind of what the economics are. But, assuming that it's not something that is, completely break the bank, I would still like to see us move away from Roundup and pilot it at least for a year, see how it goes.
I really don't think that it would probably break the bank too much if we're talking about glyphosate use. If we were starting to talk about some of the other stuff like the pond chemical treatment, the spray for mosquitoes, that kind of stuff, I think that it would, incur a cost. But, I think we've sprayed now maybe 16 times annually for the whole year. It's a spot spray. We call them out as needed. And when we say spot spray, it is literally as simple as somebody going out with the wand and spraying it a couple of times. So we could probably quantify that pretty quick, and even between now and the end of the year, start to try something different. If we were talking the grass areas, that might be a little bit different, where, we'll get kind of the weeds and we have to go in with something, but I don't think there's going to be much of a cost difference to it.
Okay.
I'd be supportive of trying some different alternatives.
Yeah, and I did have Vargas, I can send this to Matt, but they did come up with a couple of products already. They're more organic based. I think they mentioned in the memo that they gave me one of them we've used in the past, so I'll make sure that we get that so you guys can see it.
So if there is support for moving away from it, I think this is something that we should message out to the community to let the community know that we're actually making a conscious decision to not use Roundup.
Agreed. When could that be implemented? Is that something that could be implemented this season or? Okay.
Yeah, so kind of how this will work is, anytime typically Matt Rarick and the park staff is starting to see something pop up or the weather's changing. Like right now, we've gone from wet, it's going to be, if it gets really warm, you're going to see weeds pop everywhere. If we can't kind of get a hold of it quickly with, watering or neutralizing it by just quickly kind of hand pulling, we call Vargas and say, hey, in 48 hours, we want you to spot spray this specific area and this specific area. So all it would be is the next time we tell them to spray, we'd say we need you to come out and spray with this chemical, not that chemical. And then they give us the MSDS sheet, and there's a log book every time we spray that everything has to be recorded. We turn that information into the state. So that's kind of how that process would work. It's just a matter of us, when we see something pop up, that's when we'll call them. So, and we do anticipate, with the weather still being this kind of swinging wet to warm, that we'll probably have weeds for a little bit.
So Patrick, to make sure I understood what you were saying before, from the reports, it sounded like the organic treatments that we've tried before have not been effective. Is that?
They're not as effective. And at that time, we were kind of balancing the cost as well. So we
Right.
kind of have this, it could be really effective if you put a lot of it on there. It's
Right.
just, we were trying to
It's
balance
just
the
yes.
cost. Yeah,
So are you saying that there are new organic compounds that Vargas thinks might be effective, or
I just
You're
think
just
if we're
gonna go to the hand
specific, to talking about the glyphosate, we just don't use it that much. So they provided me with glufosinate, GLUFOSINATE is what they provided me with. They said that it'd be approximately 3 times the current cost of using the glyphosate. But when you're talking about only spraying 15-ish times a year, I think when we first took a crack at this, we were looking at places like Purple Park, Community Park, where you had kids in there, and we were saying, look, we're not going to put any chemical down. We're going to try to totally manage it with like a pre-emergent or a fertilizer and then irrigation. And that in the small test areas, just, with those kind of branching thistles that'll come out the broadleaf.
right?
Then we started getting people saying, well, my kid's trying to play soccer and you've got weed patches.
So you're doing both selective treatments and non-selective
Yeah.
treatments back.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Well, we've got you. We've had some recent questions about the pond. Pond, we were having a little side discussion about the pond smells. And
Yep.
maybe you could give us what you know on that.
So interesting enough, we did start to see kind of a duckweed and algae bloom. So by the time you're smelling it, we've already had the chemicals in it for a while, and it's starting to break down what was in it. And that does take a couple days to cycle through. And again, with the waterways, we won't always, we try to proactively treat the ponds without just pouring tons of chemicals and stuff into it. So we'll we have a contractor, and it's his responsibility and our park staff to kind of drive around frequently and say, okay, are we going to get a big bloom here? Can we control it? Is nature going to do the work for us? Do we need to treat it? And a lot of times by the time we treat it, if it's something that's really blooming quickly, you'll smell the decomposition. And that's what's going on right now, especially over on Rock Creek Circle. So I know we got the same email saying, well, you need to come and treat it. It smells bad. By the time you smell it, we've treated it.
Okay.
So our hope is that you guys just never know. But I'll say we also haven't really had to deal with the rain and the temperatures quite like we have recently. So that's what that is. When you smell it, we're on it.
Okay.
Yeah. And we do, that and the mosquitoes, we really try to take a hands-off approach on using those chemicals as well. Because we'll get the same concerns from dog
Yeah.
owners about letting dogs get too close to the water. So we try to balance when to treat them, how to treat them, and then I think the other misconception is not all ponds are equal. So each pond has its own kind of chemistry. So a lot of times, we're trying to chase, as you guys know, north of town weather pattern can sometimes be south of town. Open space ponds react differently to purple park ponds. So it's, we're kind of moving and shifting with it, and thank goodness we have the contractor for it. So, and we did approach them about coming up with, is there something we can do to neutralize the smell? We're even getting some pricing to get a guy in a boat to go and scoop, which we've done before. So.
Are you seeing an increase in mosquitoes given the wacky weather?
We are, but,
I mean,
Matt Rarick on...
To the point where you need to treat more than usual?
Yeah, we're treating pretty aggressively.
Okay.
What we've kind of found throughout the years is most of the mosquito problems that we were seeing were actually occurring in Boulder County open space.
Sorry.
Yeah, and what's been interesting is Matt Rarick on our staff worked with somebody from Boulder County and the city of Boulder. And they just kind of scoured that open space and started to find all these little pockets of water that we weren't really aware of. And then what we have noticed is because of the rain, we're starting to get pockets and pooling of water in places that we never had before. But yeah, we're definitely starting to treat. So, and more in community park we've noticed than before.
Okay. All right, all things weeds. Appreciate that update. All right. Next item is legislation. Update from town attorney on recent legislation.
Did the board receive a memo from Kendra over the weekend?
We got an individual. We got some.
Yeah, she was going to do a summary report for you, give it to you over the weekend so you had everything in one memo. And
I was looking through I'm happy to kind of go through them. If we wanted to just kind of go through them one by one in terms of the previous memos that she sent us.
Sure.
And then if somebody takes notes as to the direction you want to give her.
My preference would be to, if Kendra's going to draft a memo summarizing them, my preference would be to wait.
I thought that's what we had said we were going to do since she wouldn't be here. But I might be mistaken.
There's one or two that we could, I think she was going to have to draft anyway, and it would just be a little bit more efficient to have her go ahead, like the marijuana one.
Right. There's one about public consumption, which I think we need to address to deal with statutory changes by a certain period of time. And so I think we already gave her the direction to do that one at the last meeting. But then there was on-site consumption and delivery as well. And that's actually a discussion for us to have. So like on-site consumption is now they have retail marijuana, hospitality, and sales establishment licenses, provided that it's.
That won't apply to us because we don't have any of those facilities in town.
Well, technically, I mean, it's not in the code right now, so the town doesn't allow it. So she's assuming that we're not interested in allowing it and changing that. So I mean, it would be pretty inconsistent if we don't allow retail establishments, but then we would all of a sudden allow on-site establishments. But we could if we wanted to. But she's assuming that we wouldn't because we already don't.
I think the second half, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the open enjoyment in sort of your backyard, right? Senate Bill 224
Right.
allows for that, sort of, and that would require a code change on behalf of the town to allow people to partake, enjoy marijuana in their own backyard.
And that's one we already gave her direction to move forward on, right? Because we had no choice in that. Am I mistaken? That's the,
Yes, so
that's that's part of the public consumption piece.
Right. Yes, you're probably right.
Yeah, because the definition of public is an area accessible by the public, and we need to amend it to say observable by the public, because that would, so your backyard is not available to the public, but if you're in the backyard, is observable to the public.
I think the pieces we have to talk about would be the on-site consumption and then delivery, whether we want to allow delivery. I think that's the piece that is probably more important for us because clearly we don't have any marijuana establishments in Superior, so the on-site is not immediate, but delivery, there's plenty of marijuana establishments over in Louisville that I'm sure people in Superior could call and get their marijuana delivered to them. So is that something that we want to allow for in our code? I think that's what we need to have discussion.
Yeah, and I think the way her memo was phrased is the town has a right, the choice to prohibit residential delivery, because if we don't step in, then it's allowed. Looking to the lawyer. Because I think that the way that the memo was written and the way that I understand the legal language is we would have to specifically prohibit marijuana delivery in town.
So let me just renew my statement of, we feel underprepared and maybe incomplete to have a worthy discussion. And Mark, I mean, no disrespect, I think you are running circles around the rest of us in terms of understanding this. I'm incredibly dependent upon Kendra on some of these complex issues.
Yeah, I think having a comprehensive memo on all of them and recommended directions.
Yeah, if I have to do the work, if she sends 9 memos and I have to do the work, it's fine, I'll do whatever work is necessary. I just want to ask Kendra, okay, specifically what's required, where's the flexibility, and,
Right.
you know, and it's just her not being here, we may get kind of wrapped around the axle. So, but I'm super appreciative of Mark's input here. But my preference would be to defer.
So before we move off of this, and while we are talking about Kendra and receiving additional memos and legal work, my understanding when we walked away from the work session with the Rock Creek HOA board was that we had basically opened it up and through our discussions basically given direction to Kendra to open up conversations with the attorney from the Rock Creek HOA to at least share notes and at least have a conversation. I asked Kendra over the weekend if that had occurred yet, and her response was I didn't think that that direction would be given to me.
I think
thought it
Kendra's
had.
opinion is she's more than welcome to receive a phone call from any citizen, attorney, colleague, and I think that, you know, but I didn't get the sense she was going to take that outbound. I thought she opened herself up to be available for questions. I mean, I think she has a point of view, and she shared that point of view with us. I think she shared that point of view with others, and she needs to share that point of view with another attorney. I don't object to that.
That's kind of how I remembered it was, as I'll be here and I'll take the call, but we're not going to start working together.
Right, and I'm not saying working together. It sounded like there was interest from both parties to at least share notes, hear what the other had to say. Because one of the parties, the other party wasn't interested in having an open discussion because they were having executive meeting conversations on the topic. So having the lawyers discuss it, I think, was their preference. That was the way I heard it.
Okay.
So can we follow up with Kendra and just?
I will. Yep. All right. Okay. On to Rock Creek Parkway, 2 lanes. Discuss the board's interest in pursuing this.
So can I ask a question, just in terms of how this got on the agenda? Because if I recall, our early June meeting, we, as a board, had said we were open to a possible conversation on this, kicked it over to the TSC, and the TSC sort of gave Alex and Carlos, direction to go and do the analysis on what the right size for Rock Creek Parkway should be, given the volume and speed of the traffic. But I thought we were going to rely on that to decide what's the optimal size for Rock Creek. I mean, it's sort of like the stop sign thing. It feels like we just sort of jumped to the end without having the data. Like, I don't personally even know what the right size is for Rock Creek Parkway, absent staff data.
So that's my fault.
Okay.
Because I thought when the board was talking about it, we were starting to get into the weeds, and I thought it was said, well, let's push this to the retreat and have the discussion.
Yeah, and that might be okay, because I mean,
so that's why-
Carlos and Alex kind of already told us what's going to happen. Is you look at the volume of Rock Creek, it's probably one lane. And Carlos gave us a great example of where if you decide to do something, make sure you do it wholeheartedly and stand behind it, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of people complaining.
Yeah.
And it's probably the right conversation to have. My thinking had been the TSC had sort of given staff the direction, give us the data on the volume and
I think that's generally correct. I think the exception here is just the warning that this will be, if you choose to go forward with this, regardless of what the data says, this will be one of the most emotional and hardest fought things that you will do in your elected career. And so, given that guidance, I didn't ask for it to be on the agenda. I liked it, the fact it's on the agenda. I will state my personal bias is, safety will always be paramount. I think the fewer Frogger lanes that people need to cross, the safer it's going to be, but I could be proven wrong. So I'm certainly interested in staff spending time on stuff like this and thinking about what that might look like and how might we do it. But if I'm the minority, then, or whoever else is, if we, or if there's not a minority of opinions and staff should look at it, then, I'm not against killing it before it ever gets started, but I think it's important. I think it's a pretty dangerous road, and I think the traffic pattern supports it. And for those watching at home, remember, we were supposed to have the mirror of Rock Creek on the other side, so this was going to be a pretty big major road. You needed a big, 4-lane road to get, tens of thousands of people through to get over the 36. That never happened, which is, it's a great thing. But now are we a little overbuilt, and can we modernize to something a little bit more safe? So.
Yeah, I think this has been an issue that wasn't on my radar until I got elected, and then the first meeting that I had with a constituent about any issue that was on their mind was actually about this issue. It was about somebody who lived in one of the cul-de-sacs that runs up against Rock Creek Parkway, and the complaint that was raised is just the noise, the speeds, and just the tendency. And this was somebody who was formerly a police officer and was able to he knows 35 when he sees it, he knows 45 when he sees it, he knows it when he hears it, and you can hear the sound in the tires. And if you just think about the way that Rock Creek was planned, and it was planned and developed in the late 80s, early 90s, and had they been doing it again, it never would have been designed this way, right? Like, you never would have designed a 4-lane road, 4-lane highway, essentially right through the middle of a residential subdivision if you were planning it today. So, while I think it would be nice to hear from TSC and the consultant in terms of the traffic impacts, to me, I'm sort of like lesser concerned about the traffic aspect of it rather than I am about the aesthetics of it. I think the community itself would be a nicer community if it was just a 2-lane road on either side with nice wide bike lanes, maybe a wider median or a wider buffer, and it was just kind of a tighter artery. I think that if the other thing about this resident who raised this issue is when you design roads without really consideration for the topography, right, and you design roads that are big and wide and they're going downhill, it doesn't matter what the speed limit is going to be, because people are going to drive based on how they feel the road should support the speed that they're going to travel. And the only way to really force, and this was one of the things that we heard when we were talking about Castle Peak and speed bumps and potential for, when before Laura was on the board, she and some of her neighbors presented, alternate side of the street parking, and one of the things we heard from that presentation was actually when you have more people parking on both sides of the street and it's a little tighter, it actually slows people down because people feel less safe than they do when they have a nice wide open road. So, I think there's a similar situation here. If we had a narrower street, you'd probably be able to get people to drive 25 miles an hour or 35 miles an hour or whatever is appropriate for the community. So, I'm really interested in having this discussion, but I agree with Kevin, this is gonna be one of those kind of transformational, really politicized issues that there's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna say, well, what are you doing in my community? But I think this is a situation kind of like Weldona, where you have just issues with the underlying design of the community that, may not necessarily be politically easy to fix, but are right to fix and should be fixed. And I think that our community would be better if it was a 2-lane road instead of a 4-lane road.
Mark, I completely, to both you guys, I agree 100%. I didn't let my daughter and my son cross at the pedestrian crossing until they're about 12 years old because I never felt it was safe. And the same resident is a friend of ours as well. He thinks the road should be stopped in Indiana and just be dead-ended. And the thing that he also brought up to me, as you look at these road mapping softwares, Waze and Google Maps, more and more cars are coming down that don't live in the neighborhood. And they're going to all the new developments that are popping up around Walmart in Broomfield. Because Rock Creek Parkway is now becoming that parkway, that connector to Highway 36. And unless we do something significant soon, the volume of cars going down there at 30 or 40 or 50 is going to just keep increasing. Because the same resident pointed out, his truck, if you start at the top in McCaslin, keep your foot off the brake, you will hit 70 by the bottom of the hill. Just because of the topography, and it's a nicely paved road, most people, as their cars get bigger, don't comprehend the speeds that those cars are moving any longer. So this has been front and center. I do agree it's going to be a very difficult decision and a very difficult process. But I think given what's happening around Superior, specifically to the east and the volume of residents that are coming in there, if we don't act soon and with some sort of significant changes, it's not going to get better on its own.
I pushed several weeks ago, several meetings ago, that I wanted to see us to do something to slow down the traffic on Rock Creek Parkway. Tonight, I had to run back home, and literally I was going 37 miles an hour, and some guy blew his horn at me to get out of the lane so he could, go faster, which I did, but he then zoomed by. And several years ago, we actually talked about having golf carts in the community. I think Clint is the only one who was on the board at the time. It was, I think, before we were elected. And at the time, one of the reasons I was opposed to it is we didn't really have a good place we could take golf carts except to take them on our sidewalks. And then we were concerned about golf carts running into people on the sidewalks. Rock Creek Parkway, to me, is an ideal place where if we took that other lane and made it for golf carts and e-bicycles and things like that, it gives us the opportunity to connect to downtown Superior. And I know this will be a hard conversation, but I also think Neil has raised an extremely good point that people are coming off 36 and they're going down Rock Creek Parkway to get to Broomfield. They're not coming through Flatirons. And one of the main reasons they're not doing it is the stoplights on Colton Road in Broomfield stink. and I know Clint and I have had this conversation before, but it's much easier for them to come down Rock Creek Parkway to get home than to go through their own town because the stoplights are so bad on Colton. So I don't know that we're prepared to have the conversation, but I would really like to see us have that conversation sooner rather than later because we have got to slow traffic down on that road, period, end of statement. It's dangerous. And for me, safety is one of the most important jobs we have. And if I have a kid that's growing up on Weldona and they want to get across to Purple Park or the school, it's dangerous.
Agreed. I'd love to see golf carts in town in my lifetime.
See, you'd get me on board with the golf carts if I could get the traffic slowed down.
I think that could be a really cool way to redesign that roadway. I mean, the only way to reduce the speed and increase the safety is going to be to change the design of the roadway. It's not putting up new speed limit signs. It's just not going to happen that way. So my biggest concern is earlier we had the capital improvement discussion. We've got so much on our plate that I'm really concerned that the success of this will depend on people's appetite, and that appetite has to take into consideration everything else that's going on in their world, and how many cones they're dealing with, and construction projects and trucks and everything else. So I fear that as cool and as beneficial as this could be, and I would support it, I just think we've really got to be conscious of the timing and the execution. Otherwise, I think it'll just be dead on arrival, because people will just be like, too much, too soon, and not having it.
The one thing that jumped out at me, and you know, I think Ken asked Alex to forward the crash data, and he sent that around today, so thanks for doing that, Ken. That was really illuminating. I mean, you look at, you know, where the crashes have happened in this town. Obviously, a lot of them happen in the marketplace, right? Like people, you know, bumping into each other in parking lots. You know, but then, you know, where we have, you know, problem intersections, there's Colton and Rock Creek Parkway. And then there's a number of accidents that have occurred at Coal Creek Drive and Rock Creek Parkway, and at the roundabout at 88. And, you know, I mean, I think part of that is people are just coming down really fast down the hill, and it's a really wide crossing. You know, a couple of years ago, there was, you know, somebody took out one of the light poles along the median there. So, I mean, I think it's good that we're starting to address I think Neil raised a really good point about, you know, pedestrian safety in terms of the crossing, with moving back the median there to make an easier turn, and then, you know, discussions about a light or a roundabout at Coal Creek Drive. All of that is also dependent upon whether or not there's a connection to downtown Superior. You know, that's going to really change the nature and character of the usage of that neighborhood. But you know, if that ends up being a connection point to downtown Superior, I mean, I think the problem's going to get worse, and we're going to need to address it one way or the other, whether it's a light, a roundabout, a narrowing of the street. You know, it's going to be a safety issue. We're going to have more people crossing. I'm concerned about, you know, the kids getting to Superior Elementary, getting to Purple Park. I wouldn't let my kids cross that. I mean, I remember running for trustee and putting up lawn signs, and, you know, running for my life to get some of those out there, because people are just barreling down Rock Creek Parkway. It's just not a safe design, and I agree, like, yeah, there's limited dollars. I think that Rock Creek Parkway is just such a poorly designed road that it merits attention sooner rather than later to address the safety concerns with it.
A couple comments. You know, we did look at narrowing Rock Creek Parkway over 15 years ago. The question was asked, you know, what can we do? How can you narrow it? So we looked at, do you make the median wider, or do you take the lanes from the outside? It's difficult from the drainage standpoint, utility standpoint, to make, you know, major changes like that. Now, of course, we can do it striping. And is that the long-term future for it? You know, try to, you know, do it with the paint. You know, Rock Creek Parkway at some point has to be, you know, reconstructed. So I think at that point we have an opportunity to make some major changes there. And I think it's farther down in the CIP, and I think before that maybe we do some demonstrations or some restriping to test some of those, you know, those concepts. It's also interesting what Sandy brought up, because right now in the transportation community we're talking about what do you do with bikes and scooters and e-bikes and all these other slow-moving vehicles, and they're talking about maybe we should take that right lane and make it a slow lane, and we're debating about what we should name it now, and what vehicles should go on it. So I mean, the transportation community is debating that, and because we have all these slow-moving vehicles, where do you put them? Do you put them in the bike lane, or do you just take one lane and let everybody go? And even technologies we haven't thought of yet. So that's going on as well. So, but I think in the CIP we're going to have to do something with Rock Creek Parkway, and that's a good time to really transform it into something different than what it is today. And before then, maybe we have some striping project that would make sense. I would like to maybe, you know, proceed at some point in a year or two or soon to get a consultant on board to, develop some options in terms of what we could do with the road and how, what the cost would be, because I think it could be significant cost for what you guys are talking about. I mean, you could put roundabouts at Pitkin, and you can put one at Coleridge and one at Cold Creek Parkway, and then I'm sure you're not going to get very high speeds if you have 4 roundabouts through there. I mean, if speed and safety is what you're talking about, roundabouts would make sense. But also, what are we trying to accomplish?
I think the board's instinct was the 4 lanes. We all want the road to be smaller, right? But you've convinced everybody through that the people drive as to the design of the road. And so I think our instincts were, okay, if we design the road instead of be a 4-lane, 6-lane in some places, really almost more, but more of a 2-lane road, either through redesign or striping or whatever. But I think your guidance is good. I think look at the consultant and come up with an action item. And if we're wrong and it's not a 2-lane road, if a 2-lane road is it's probably 1.5 miles long, if that's a $18 million project, it's a non-starter, right? But if you could put in 3 circles or 4 circles for $4.5 million, then maybe that's the right decision. So I think that's where I think, from my perspective, I'm not for a 2-lane road. I'm for the capital improvement project that fixes Rock Creek Parkway so people drive safe, right? So I think I'd love to see it as a, maybe something that is a 2020 type engagement. But I think a lot of people saw this on the agenda today and said, what the heck is this? Are you going to restripe it tomorrow? For those watching at home, no, we're not restriping anything. We're just trying to make the road a little bit safer, and 4 lanes to 2 is one idea. And I think there's consensus that we need to do something, and good thing we got you to help lead us.
It definitely does make sense to have the discussion now, before we're going through the actual, capital improvement project to repave it, right? Because then it's too late, it's wasted money. So before we spend the money repaving, doing whatever we're going to do to Rock Creek Parkway, let's have this discussion, decide on a strategy and go with it. But yeah, I agree. Let us know how much you need in terms of a consultant, and let's keep the discussion going.
And I'd even be open to not what you need, but the time you need. As you said, there's lots of discussion now about what do you do with all these alternative modes of transportation. I mean, if we don't have solid consensus across the community yet, and no one has quite figured that out, I don't want us to go down one path. Let's say we do 3-4 roundabouts, and now we found that when e-scooters come to Superior, or if we do golf carts, now we have no safe way of transporting those modes from point A to point B. I think we've done ourselves a disservice. So safety paramount, yes, but this is a very long-term investment that we need to get right. So that's the other piece. Whenever we go forward, I want to hear that this is the right solution for the long term.
Good points. All right, next item is committee informal meetings, required notes.
Yeah, this is something that I've talked to Patrick and his staff about, because, sometimes committees, historic commissions had a dinner at somebody's house, and whether those are allowed, and if notes are to be taken. And so I thought it'd be good to put this on there just for the board to see all the resolutions, the ordinance that was done to establish and regulate the committees, and see if there's any questions, since a number of you are liaisons to each committee, to the committees. Basically, committees can have these meetings, they can have them off-site, they just need to be noticed, and there needs to be notes taken per the open records request, or act that's state law. So, yeah.
Do we have, I know it's been an issue with CATS because they have their alternate meeting, and are they taking minutes at their alternate site meeting?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
They haven't been popping up in our,
Okay.
I believe they've been taking them but not publishing them,
Okay, so
but I may be incorrect.
what's the sense of taking them if you don't publish them?
I think these are also, I want
And
to.
I'm not being critical of them.
Yeah, I want to just make sure we're talking, let's just talk very specifically, let's talk about policy and a best practice, okay?
Yeah, and that's where I'm trying to be. It's just, it
So
seems
there's-
like we've got some inconsistency.
I think if a committee is doing some important work, what should the priority be for an upcoming event or a proposal they're going to have to a board, or how best spend their very limited money we give them? That's in a very structured meeting. I think, I personally recognize that our, this town runs on volunteers, right? I mean, we have staff, but not very many, that we are as great as we are only because of the volunteers. Many of them are, effectively we're volunteers. Not really, but, in a way we are. Sometimes there are work sessions that occur in projects, and sometimes it's just, people getting together that, something needs to get painted, some signs need to be hung. And so I want to be a little careful with kind of over-processing this thing with the concept of an informal meeting. Of course, any formal meeting should be agended, there should be notes, the public should be welcomed, those notes should be published. But if our volunteers in the community are gathering in an informal way to get some work done, I personally don't necessarily want to discourage that, but if there's a line that's crossed, then we could help them identify that bright line that says, okay, if you talked about this informal meeting, and I'm making this up, if you talked about the informal meeting in your last meeting and you said, okay, we're all going to get together at Joanne's house next Tuesday, then, okay, then you just created a second meeting. That's not appropriate. But, if, you find yourself overwhelmed during the week with the project you took to get something painted or signs to be hung, and you text a few friends and volunteers to say, hey, can somebody come and help me think through this process, or go to the Home Depot to get some paint with me? I don't want to discourage our volunteers from actually volunteering. And so I'm a little worried about this whole informal meeting process that this great little four-square mile town, may over-process this thing. Right? Is this really a problem that we're trying to solve? I didn't put this on the agenda. I have no idea why it's here. But
so what? I agree with you. I don't want to go too far, especially, I think back to the caps, when they're going out and painting lines, yeah, that's probably something that's informal. They're out doing something. I don't need minutes from that. That's not a problem for me. Where I want to make sure that I can do my best job is if committees are getting together and actually discussing the topics at hand, and I'll use CAPS as an example just because I know they do have their second meeting. Personally, I was trying to go back and read up on the work they've been doing, because CAPS has a huge amount on their plate right now, and it's for me to know how to give direction, for me to make sure that we're going in the right direction. I need to be able to do my due diligence. I think for me, because, and again, just CAPS is the easy one off the top of my head, not picking on them, they do a great job. I know they have their second meetings that they do, and it's off-site, so it's not televised. I try to watch almost all of our committee meetings, so I don't have that ability, so making sure we get minutes from those meetings, I think, is incredibly important. Going beyond that are we going out to get paint or any other type of that less formal example? Yeah, I don't need anything. So it's going to come down to the definition, but I think we have a scenario where there's a need for additional minutes that we're not getting right now.
I would agree with Ken on that, and I think we're going to get into too much trouble if we try to decide what's a formal meeting versus what's an informal meeting. Great example is tonight, our board retreat. we are specifically not making any decisions in this board retreat, and yet we are still publicly noticing it, we're still televising it, we're still publishing meeting minutes from it. I agree with Ken, you know, if CAPS is going out.
Phyllis is saying no.
Oh,
No minutes.
no minutes, but at least it's televised, people can see what's going on, and there is an agenda. Thank you, Phyllis.
We gotta force our paths.
But we're getting there as far as the transparency goes. I mean, I think there's a big difference between going out and painting crosswalks versus if you're discussing business, that we need to have visibility into
See,
that.
so it's just,
And
you're discussing t-shirt designs and sizes and paint colors and, you know, we just,
well, I think to use the CAPS example at the informal meetings, it is business getting discussed. It's not just designs, it's how should we do
I don't
this?
know how,
What should we do
so
about that?
I think that's just, it's that's not agenda, B, it feels like we're targeting CAPS, and C, I just categorically disagree. So with the quote business that's being discussed, so I just don't think it's a fair topic at this point.
Well,
So-
if this was, say, OSAC or ProStac or any of our committees who had, I mean, I think ACE or CAPS comes up simply because right now they're the only ones that have a second informal meeting.
Yes.
So if the board decides that we should tell people to, you know, if you're going to have a meeting, it should be in town hall, and it should be agenda, and just as simple as that. And, you know, if that's what you guys want to suggest, it's fine. And if a couple of them choose to run into each other in the grocery store, you know, and they're not doing business, and but I think they're trying to balance what they believe is the direction of the board, which is, please notice these things, which they have, right? And of course, everybody's welcomed. And at the same time, you know, I think that, again, I've attended a couple of them, but frankly, they're work sessions, right? So I haven't really, they're not completely dissimilar to this. There are no decisions that are being made. They're just work sessions. So if we tell them that they can't do it unless you're going to a town hall, I think we're going to find that we have unintentionally diminished what CAPS is capable of doing.
So
Which is fine if that's if we're going to err on the side of caution, I suppose we could do that, but.
So personally, I'm okay with an either or approach. I mean, if we don't have room for them to be in town hall and have it be televised, then I think notes are a great substitute for that. So if they want to be off-site and take notes, that's great. If they want to be on-site and have it videotaped and not take notes, I think that works too. I think the challenge is just right now, to Ken's point, we don't really have any visibility into it.
And for me, it has absolutely nothing to do with being overly cautious or anything like that. I just want to be able to know what's going on with our committees. I take great interest in everything that our committees do, and that helps me do a better job. I am doing a worse job by not knowing what half of what is CAPS discusses because I don't see it in minutes. I can't watch it on film. I am losing literally half of their discussion simply because it's offsite and I don't see minutes on it. I want to be able to take everything they're saying and build it in to the way I make decisions. And in my mind, that's a positive attribute to them. That is saying, we want to hear you. We want to be able to use the value that you're creating right now. And I just don't have any way to do that for those meetings.
So just a question, because I don't know. And I think one of the things we forget is how unique this town is with all of this. I mean, Arvada town is 10 times our size. You can't watch a televised meeting there for your life. They make big decisions. The only way I saw one of the big decisions, someone was FaceTime streaming it, from inside the meeting, right? So Jefferson Parkway, big decision, but somebody happened to be streaming it on FaceTime. Otherwise, you'd be lucky to know what they decided, until the minutes came out 3 or 4 months later. So, I mean, we have this incredible system, and I don't feel like everyone should have to meet in here to use the system. I mean, it's great, board meeting, we absolutely have to use it. I mean, I agree, you know, we have a lot of very dedicated community members throughout the town. I think we want to be receptive to what works for them as much as possible. But, you know, I think where I may differ with, you know, if we have a secondary meeting and it's publicly noticed, I think, is staff attending the secondary meetings or these alternate meetings? Okay, so that, you know, so that becomes the challenge in terms of trying to compile the notes.
So the notes are taken in the committee, not by a staff member,
Oh,
but
that's
by a
fine.
member of the committee.
So then it's just a question of publicizing.
Exactly.
So I think that as long as we are letting the community know that meetings are occurring and everybody's invited, it's, you know, open to the public, you know, I certainly don't feel like we need to prescribe that these meetings need to be happening here. You know, if you want to have meetings off-site, then you can have meetings off-site. I'm sure the town attorney's going to say that these committees are subject to sunshine laws, just like in open meetings laws.
And that's why
Just
they're
like-
trying,
just
it's a
like-
great point, and that's why
just like we are.
they are trying to do the right thing by
Right.
noticing,
Right.
and if the guidance to them is, you know, continue to have the meetings, you have to help us out, and you have to publish the minutes in a more timely fashion. There has to be some completeness to them. I don't think we'll get a ton of objection. I think that's,
Yeah, so, you know, I don't want to cramp the style of anybody. And, you know, so if you want to have a meeting off-site, be my guest. You want to have 2 meetings, 3 meetings, however many meetings you want to have. Thank you for volunteering. Just publicize it so the community knows so they can attend if they're interested. And, you know, take some, you know, reasonable notes so there is some record of what was discussed, so we can comply with the open meetings laws and the sunshine laws.
and then I think the third part of that is leave the big decisions for because I don't want to handicap Ken. Like, I really do appreciate your interest in caps, and I don't want to handicap you, and so, you know, I think you'll be a little patient if we're, you know, I mean, there's literally designs of the prairie dogs, and we're sketching things, and the tail is too big and looks odd on the prairie dogs, and we need to, you know, and do you want the smiling prairie dog or the angry prairie dog? I mean, these are the conversations that are occurring, and if you want to be in there, we'd love to have you, and they'd love to have you. But at the end of the day, the decision to make the prairie dog and the presented prairie dog and the fact that it's 4.5 feet high and it costs $8,200, you know, that's in your public meeting.
Right.
And I love this committee, guys, and they work so hard. I just want to give them, I want them to, I suspect they're watching now, and so I want them to please understand that I really like what you said, Ken. It's, you're asking for this for you because you don't want to be handicapped, I mean that in a positive way, in your ability to legislate and think about what's next.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, and you do a great job. I just want to be able to use everything that comes out during my decisions. And you know, your statements of, we're literally talking about, do we draw a smiley face or a frowny face? I don't even know the answers to that. I don't even know that that's the type of discussion because I have no insight into it. And I mean, we already show up to a ton of meetings. I can't go at an exact time to show up to a second meeting, but I do have flexibility during the day, during the weekend, whenever I can, to watch the videos and read the things, and that's the value of
Right. No, I
other
agree.
pieces.
I agree. So can we?
One of the things that you reminded me when you were talking about making the big decisions at the regular meetings, you know, one of the things that we always get wrapped up in is, okay, we've got the town attorney saying this is what you need to do to comply with the law, and then we're like, okay, we need to comply with the law, and then we get kind of lost in like the form, and we don't really focus so much on the substance. You know, one of the, and I'll leave it to Kendra to explain it if I'm not getting this right, but even though she's not here, but when she watches this and then she'll go back and explain. My understanding is one of the ways, you know, so we, you know, the 3 of us, we meet at Safeway and we start having a discussion about something, right? And technically that's a meeting and it's not noticed, right? But one of the ways that you can cure that is, you know, you can take meeting notes, you can take minutes, but you can also then disclose that conversation happened at the next meeting. So to the extent that CAPS has this informal meeting that is happening offsite, and they have some discussions, provided that they give like a little recap at the beginning of the next
I love
meeting.
that
Say,
idea.
You know what, hey, we had this meeting offsite, we didn't take official minutes, however, these are the things that we discussed.
Three things that were discussed.
The three things that were discussed, and we're actually going to take formal, make a formal vote and recommendation on, that issue here tonight, which is on the agenda, and, then they can have a discussion, did I miss anything? And no, I think you got it all. And then you're kind of curing it, you're not.
Well, I guess what I'm just
hamstringing it,
asking is they already take extremely detailed notes at their mid-month meeting. We just aren't publishing them. So I think to Ken's point around transparency, yeah.
We don't have.
Right. Can we ask that if they're taking these very detailed full meeting minutes anyway, that they be sent to you and they be published? It's, 1 minute extra effort to publish them versus not. I think they're taking the notes. They're all there. They're very readable and they make a big difference in understanding.
I think, if you want to say, I was going to say, I think we'd give them the option.
Okay.
What Mark laid out is a great alternative, or if they're happy, if they're already typed in and want to have
They're
them
in a Word document formally typed up. Who was there? The meeting was called to order.
To
at
the
this
degree
time.
that, CAPS or all our committees should have discretion on how they want to bring things up, I think leaving it up to them is more than acceptable to me.
Right.
One of Patrick, Dean, and I I think we've given staff direction, and why don't I, as the liaison, maybe sit with Patrick and Dean and maybe the chair and see if there's something amenable. There is a difference between, I spend a lot of time at work and meetings. I take a lot of notes in those meetings. The notes in those meetings look nothing like my minutes of the meeting, and hopefully my clients aren't watching this right now. But those are two drastically different things. So it's a little bit more than the extra minute just to publish the notes that somebody might be taking to create some actionable minutes that are part of a public record. I mean, there are. We have discussed the anatomy of a prairie dog. That does not need to be part of the official meeting minutes, right? But there are notes around the anatomy of a prairie dog. So I'll leave it at that.
I think a related topic to this, though, comes back to what Mark was talking about, because I've encountered this a little bit with OSAC. They will have a small group of people who will work on a project and then make a decision, and they send the decision to the rest, and this was part of the learning process that they've been going through. But I think it would help if we really make it clear to our committees just what you said, is you can have the conversation as three people, but you've got to bring it to the meeting. You've got to officially disclose what the information that you gathered was. Part of it had to do with, I think it had to do with the naming of the open space trailhead. And the committee had reached a decision about what name they were going to recommend. And then they just presented it, but it never came up in the minutes of the meeting. It was never discussed in the meeting. And so I think that's where we have to get our committees to understand too. You can do action outside of a committee meeting, but you've got to ratify it and disclose it in the meeting. Otherwise, it's not cool, because basically the way they were moving forward with this, we would have never even known, because it wouldn't have even been in the minutes of the meeting that they had made a decision. And so then I had to clear, well, the three of you can't really make a decision. You need to bring it to the committee, tell the committee what it is, and then let the committee ratify that decision, so that it is the decision of the committee in a public meeting. So I think that's a really good point, and maybe there's some way we could put that in the volunteer manual to help them understand that additional step too.
And Kevin, please make sure they realize when you have this discussion, it's a product of your own success. It's making sure that we hear everything they have to say, because we've heard good things. So
Right. There are good problems and bad problems. This is a good problem again.
Exactly.
So,
All right. Good discussion.
okay, thank you.
All right, next item, pickleball courts at Wildflower Park, discussion and direction on whether to convert the current basketball court to pickleball courts.
So I was discussing with Patrick, Wildflower Park, and asking how things were going with pickleball courts being used on a basketball court. And he threw out the idea that, yeah, we could actually convert these things for a fairly small amount of money compared to build, if we wanted to do that rather than building 4 new courts at Autry Park or do both or whatever. So I thought it was a good idea and thought maybe the board would at least discuss it and provide some direction on if that's something you want us to look into further.
Sorry.
Got a few emails on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a pretty long thread on the Superior Community Group about this as well. Personally, I have had fun playing pickleball at the basketball court at Wildflower, and I think it was a great idea for us to stripe those courts to make it available to try it out. But they're not pickleball courts; they're basketball courts, and I don't like, just generally, I don't like the idea of taking away an amenity that exists. We've already spent a lot of money on Wildflower Park as is, and we've got a plan for pickleball courts that the board decided not to go with a couple years ago down at Autry Park, but I think times have changed, and we've entertained revisiting that now, and I think particularly in light of the skate park down at Autry Park, there's more attention being given to Autry Park, and I think that there's more demand for pickleball, and I think that it would be a mistake to do anything to Wildflower Park beyond what we've done right now, which is just striping it. And I think we should go forward with pickleball courts, but just not at Wildflower Park. But then more kind of just generally to the process, I'm kind of curious. So I appreciate that you guys were talking about this, and this is how it ended up on the agenda. I think the way, and maybe we should have asked the question when the agenda was getting kicked around, because this had the effect of kind of like swatting the hornet's nest in the community, and people getting all upset that we were going to be taking away their basketball courts. And if it wasn't something that was coming from the board as a suggestion, we should do this. All of a sudden, we're all in the defensive, saying, "Well, I don't know where this came from. We're being caught, flat-footed," and it kind of started this negative conversation about what is the board doing? Why are they taking basketball away? And
Right, we talked about potential tax increases, major road reconstruction, but the narrative was around basketball courts, the pickleball, which was a little bit frustrating. And also, I really want to change this narrative in town about being right. Feels like people want to have like the right idea, and like winning seems important, and like we got some big stuff coming in, and we got to make sure we do right by our next topic, which is the Land River building, and we got to redesign a bunch of roads, and it's like taking away an amenity, even if replacing that with another amenity, it's like if one person was harmed by that amenity, by the basketball amenity, to please 3 people with a pickleball amenity. You would think that makes sense. We please 3, upset 1, but no, it's important that we don't disrupt anybody's amenities now. And so, even though I'm not a huge basketball, you'd think I would be, not a big basketball fan, but I think we could.
make no assumption.
We should, I obviously like pickleball. I'd love to see us revisit it somewhere else, but I think the multi-use on the basketball, I think it's getting, it's a little clunky at times, and sometimes the net blows over, but big deal. Like, people are still out there, and they're still laughing and having a good time, and they're learning a little bit about the sport. Didn't really cost us anything. So I think we continue with that until the board makes an actual decision on pickleball. In the meantime, unless somebody has an opinion about a full repurpose, I think we.
If there's anything that we learned from the Zone 3/Riverbend public engagement, it's don't take away an amenity to put a new amenity.
Right.
I love the idea of keeping it dual purpose. That seems to be successful so far. I'd be more open to talking about more dual purpose areas if we can. If the community park basketball hoops can host that, I think that's a discussion worth having. and then discussing again at the board level whether we want to appropriate funds to actually build pickleball courts.
And the thought is not taking away the hoops. It's just a full-size court, and we've just noticed that there's probably an opportunity to keep both the hoops or put the hoops into a 3/4 court and do pickleball on the side. The original design was pickleball. So as we were trying to navigate future budgets, it was just an idea that we had to provide something. But I think we were also working on plans to build pickleball court, and that's completely fine as well.
Keep it.
So Patrick, Ian,
Hold on. We'll circle back to you in just a moment.
And Patrick, I really like this idea, or at least the thought behind it. You know, if the court is a full-size court, and it's the only one that we have that's regulation all across the board. But I agree, like, maybe it's not being utilized on a full court basis. And I was at my parents' house all weekend, ran to another trustee, and the basketball court was used maybe once this all weekend. I like the imagine creative thinking here about, how do we potentially, fill another need with a park that may be potentially underutilized, but I kind of fall in the same place as Ken does, in the sense that, Wildflower, the dust hasn't even settled. In the sense that it's an amenity that already has a following, and I'm a little reticent to repurpose it too soon. But I think it is something that ProSec's got to think about, as we look at some of our parks around town and how we might want to redevelop some of them, because some of them are somewhat long in the tooth in terms of how kids play with parks and how that's changing and evolving over time. I think it's probably a little premature with Wildflower to look at redeveloping it, but I don't disagree that the full-size basketball court could possibly use, some changes, at some time in the future, because I've rarely seen a full court basketball game being played.
After we talk about pickleball, I do want to kind of keep Wildflower on the agenda for two reasons. I want to talk about maybe a different increased amenity, and I want to talk about the absence of wildflowers at Wildflower, so, because there was also some questions about that. But any more on the pickleball?
Ian, who's kind of the coach for this whole area, and down at Impact, he's the 5.0 champ, has lots of ideas, and he's been talking with Patrick quite a bit, and I think many of you. We had a big meeting this morning, and we would like to revisit something really big like Apex does in Autry, so that we can have tournaments, so that we can bring people in from all over the country, so that we can do something really spectacular. Because right now, any of us who want to go play at that level have to go to Apex or, another state, So they don't have anything that would create that sort of draw. So coming back to all the different options we've explored, we would love for you guys to really go down to Apex, take a field trip, look at what happens at Apex, and see if we can't create that, because we're going to have the money coming back from that non-existent pre-K that was going to be behind my house. We're going to have that, and this would be an amazing draw for people to come from all over the country. And it is being taught now in middle schools, and then they're starting to teach it in elementary schools. And you go down to Apex, and you'll see people of 3-4 generations playing. So I'd love for you guys to think bigger on that. And so I love the fact that we've got some people playing at the basketball court. Honestly, there's so much wind there, and there's no dividers. It's not ideal. If we could model something after Apex and think a little bigger, it would be fantastic. So that's why I'm here, and thank you. And I have one last thing, and then I'll leave. I just want you guys to keep the police department on your agenda for that Range Rover place, because I've been hearing for 15 years they need their own place, and I just want to say I think they do too.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Sonia, I have a question.
Sure.
How many courts would be, in your ideal world,
24.
sufficient? 24 at Autry?
I would live with 12, but 24.
How many
would
do
be
they have at
awesome.
Apex?
24.
24.
And it is, the parking lot is slammed. They have 200 people easily all the time. It's packed. That's where we do all and you go there any night and you will see grandparents playing with their kids and their 6th graders and even little kids playing. It's a multi-generational sport. And I'm sorry, as a taxpayer, I'm now over 55. We've got a place in a 55 Grand Lake place. We've got 55 plus in Las Vegas. Our taxes that we pay are significantly less per dollar of what we own in those other places, and we got pickleball. So, but we don't here, but you know, that's an easy thing, it's one of the cheapest things you guys can devise. But the demographics in terms of who you're gonna bring in is phenomenal. Oh, and that path thing, build it, that's great. So, through lanterns, you're gonna do it, right? It's awesome. Thanks, guys, bye.
On the, just so long as we're talking about Longflower, Patrick and we talked about this, you know, on the, kind of your unofficial steward, right, that will do things occasionally. How much would a new post for the, I've kept the slack line off basically all summer to try to get that grass up, and I've had it up now for the last couple of weeks. It's getting a ton of use. How much would a third post cost? So we could do kind of a slack line park in there almost. So right now there's 2 posts, 1 slack line. If you got a third, then you could do a super long slack.
$6,000. I mean, it's not much. It's the footer. I mean, the footer's the expensive part.
Right.
I think the posts were like $2,000, and then it was 4 or 5 in concrete. So it's not that much.
So while we probably can't make an official decision here, I'm just curious how you guys think, what, if you're slacklined, and if you think that slackline park's cool, I'd love to.
I tried. I tried on Saturday.
It's hard.
Yeah. No, it's fun though.
Right, we need a new one. That one's getting a little ratty.
I would be in favor of, you know, ways to improve the amenities that we already have, you know, and like to that end, like with Wildflower, like the sand in the volleyball court, is that like construction kind of grade sand, like you die for a volleyball there?
Oh, those are fighting words for some of us.
Yeah.
We did a lot of work to get better sand there, so.
Do we have better sand there?
We do.
I had 2, I will bring it for him. I have a jar of the old sand and a jar of the new sand.
Okay.
Because we replaced the sand once already. That is Manhattan Beach quality sand there, my friend.
Oh, yeah?
Well,
It's not Jersey Shore Beach.
Right.
Well, we are working
You're right, there
on
are no
figuring out how to
solutions.
contain it. So to that end, we're trying to actually figure out how to do some kind of wall so that sand, which is really fine, doesn't blow over. And
Right.
so we're working on that. But yeah, slacklining of the low-hanging fruit items in that park, that's.
Turning over the sand every once in a while, so it is getting a little weedy, and frankly, having a rake and turning over the sand may improve it as well.
That's easy.
Right.
Yeah, that's easy.
Kevin, before we answer your questions, for those of us who aren't frequenters of Wildflower that often, where the third post would go, is there any current use that it would impinge upon? And are we getting a lot of use out of the current slack line?
It's the regular users, you know, there's,
That's kind of following.
yeah, I mean, there's 4 teenagers that are like, you know the game, what's that game where you hit the ball down into a net and it pops out?
Spike ball.
Spike ball?
Yeah.
These are like professional spike ball players. I go out just to watch them. They're like college kids. They're amazing. And then they hang out in slack line for a little bit. So they're out there almost every day now. And then there's a couple families that are out there, and there's always the kid that's doing it. But
It still gets a decent amount of use.
But I don't think-
We can tell because of the grass.
yeah, I don't think it would compromise any additional space. And in fact, it may actually spread out the usage to preserve some of the grass a little bit.
Yeah.
So
So my question is, I don't think I've ever seen a line for the slack line.
I sort of take it up and put it down just to try to preserve the grass because there are so many people on it, and we had to take it down this year, basically all year, to try to let the grass grow. So I took it down last year for like 4 or 5 weeks, and his team actually roped it off, and then that helped a little bit, and then this year I put it up in the spring, and then took it down for probably 5 or 6 weeks, and it's been up now for a couple weeks.
When we've looked, we've actually started researching if there's like a different, do we do the synthetic turf or something
Right.
under there so you can have it? But it gets used, and then it's become kind of when it's up, the kids like to hang out there too because it's,
Yeah.
we joke it's a cool swing for teenagers,
Right.
right? Like it bounces and,
Right.
Yeah.
so it actually is a really cool hangout spot.
I mean, I guess my question is, do we need a second slack line, or do we just need better turf under the current slack
Probably a little
line?
bit of both.
Okay.
We'll tend to hear, once you kind of do the route, I mean, it is what it is. Now we hear that people want a long line.
Right.
Which is the span gets a lot longer.
So that's why I was thinking if we did another one, of the same size, and then you would basically make the triangle, you know, you could do, what kind of triangle would that, it's not, obtuse? Isosceles triangle, there you go.
Parallelogram.
Just a quick time check in here. It's 8:45. We've got Land Rover and Challenge Coin.
Okay.
Bit of discussion.
But you're trying to get, all right, so that was that, so Paul's affirmative, let Patrick and Matt work out how to make that work.
I think it is worth, I'd like to throw in my 2 cents on pickleball. I mean, just going to get back,
Okay.
circle back to pickleball real quick, because I think direction is important on that. I do kind of like the idea of going bigger on pickleball, but I fear that Autry Park is probably not big enough for as big of something as we might want, or I just, 100 people, 200 people down there, in addition to what's there, I don't know where they fit, so. And I'd much rather have it in downtown. I know there's some downtown sites adjacent to the sports stable. I don't know the particulars of that, but I think that's a possibility somewhere in downtown, or Founders by the Marketplace. I think to have that type of amenity near commercial, to me, has always made more sense than in a non-commercial area, particularly a space limited. I'd rather see us put a shade structure and by the skate park and maybe do some other expansion of the amenities that are there. But I think if we try to cram everything down there, it's gonna run out of space.
And I do know the sports stable does have a potential plan that they're discussing to do maybe 3 courts in front of the building, in the kind of dirt area that's in front of the existing sports stable.
Is that it, or is there other area down? I thought there was.
No, I mean, we, in park number 3, which was by the cemetery, we had court space.
Still
like,
needs to be designed, yeah.
Undefined court space. At the time, you know, however many years ago, we were talking tennis. This was kind of pre-pickleball.
Okay.
So.
Maybe that's
That park, yeah, that park is a possible location.
Okay.
I mean, when ProStack discussed it, whenever it was last summer, the most logical place for them was Autry Park because of this, you know, they didn't want to mess with a park that already existed. They knew there were some limitations at Founders Park because it's a neighborhood park, not a community park. However, Autry, there is room to do it, at least 4 courts down there, and I think they figured that there could possibly be 8. 24, they're not going to go anywhere on a piece of land unless it were to be probably on the town 15, or if they came up with space in downtown Superior. But Founders Park, they had a lot of pushback because of the requirements of that park being a neighborhood park as opposed to a community park.
And
So,
we were just a little bit over 200K for 4 courts at Autry. It's just kind of a point of reference.
but, you know, I think part of what's happened to ProStack, and that's again why they want to come back to the update the Pros Master Plan, is they're getting more and more push for different amenities, and they really want to figure out what are the most important amenities. They're hearing from us that pickleball is important, but they would like to be able to update their plan. So then instead of just trying to go catch as catch can, where do we put things? They would really evaluate which are the things that are most important to the town. So.
Okay. Anything else? All right.
Well,
Yeah, I don't think, well, in terms of like next pickleball, I mean, I've been to a handful of places, and Apex is great, and it's fun, but I just don't think our little town could fit. I think 24 is out of the question. I think 12 would be great, but the reality is, you know, the most fun I've had playing pickleball is when we spend a summer on Cape Cod, and that's got, I think there's 6 or 8 courts. And pickleball, for those that haven't played, it's, you know, it's doubles most of the time. And then there's usually a couple people that are sitting out. You don't go and play a game for an hour and then go home. You play a, you know, 18-minute game, and then maybe you win and play again, and you cycle through, and you're there for 90 minutes or 2 hours. So there's a lot of people sitting there. If we had 12 or 20 courts, that's 40 people playing plus another, 20 to 30 watching. That's a lot. I mean, just thinking about how many cars and people that is. I think if you could find a way to put, 6, and I appreciate what Clint said, we need to think about building up downtown Superior. But if there was a way to put, 6 in Autry, then I think that really becomes the destination. So I personally, I mean, I'd love to see 12. I just don't think it's possible. But if you could, 6 in Autry through, 4 the way you had it laid out, and then 2, you kind of tee it off and think about 2 others somewhere, I think that might be an interesting design. But
all right. Okay, Landro. Review of timeline.
Yeah, Kevin Cologne put a lot of work into this timeline, so I want to thank him for that. So we put together, we worked backwards from the August 2020 date that we heard, staff did. So keep in mind, that's how we came to the shorter engagement period and selection of an architect and bidding out for construction and selection of construction so we could get started in January, February. Now, if the board's okay with, pushing that time, the kind of opening date out, then we have some more room to do some more community engagement, select an architect, those type of things. So, but this is our first shot at it, so we wanted to see, and then there's some survey questions in here, what the board's thoughts were. I think we're going to use Bang the Table as our online source for engagement. Well, there's a lot of cities that use that. It seems pretty popular. So, yeah, thoughts?
I'll start, I guess. I mean, so first, thanks to Kevin for putting this together.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about this today, I feel strongly, I've given a lot of thought. I hosted that listening session.
Yeah.
I feel like I spent, when I go to neighborhood barbecues, this is the topic of conversation, right? So I feel like I'm really trying to engage and listen. And the concept of the multi-use, mixed use, is very important to me. And I think it's the most consistent feedback. If you offer somebody, what do you want? Of course, I want a community center, I want a teen center, I want a library. Of course, people want this to be 100% of an amenity, but Clint stated we just cannot afford it. And Clint stated very well, there's no appetite to, at least for me, to go to the voters, to think about some type of community center. The only way that financially we can make this thing work, with my back of the envelope math that I validated a little bit with Paul, is there for us to get some commercial type tenant. I'm thinking the front, but maybe it's in the back, or who knows, but it is some mixed use. And so when I think about how to engage the community, I want to make that affirmative statement. We're excited about presenting this mixed use building, and we are going to, seek a tenant that is going to do the following, and think about, you could try, there's what's the place up in Longmont, Feed and something?
Shoes and Birds?
No, but that sounds fun. I don't want to go there. But there's, there are places that are really doing just a phenomenal job mixing the multi-generational thing and bringing in families. When people think about, I'm not even using the word brewery or brew or even alcohol, because people will think, oh, that's a bar, or that's, I don't want that in my neighborhood. But these community family things, and there's a number of commercial entities that are out there. But the building is just too big for that in its entirety, and will never attract a tenant or a partner for that. And we need space. We need a place for ProStack or whoever to be part of. We need a community amenity that somebody's not angling off of. So I feel so strongly about mixed use. And so when I want to kind of engage the community, I think, both Clint and Mark have aligned tonight to me around, we were elected to make some decisions. You guys each use, on different topics, use the same phraseology. And I feel like I've sort of made that, to me, that mixed-use decision. Now I'm not sure what those mixed uses are, but if you go out with this, oh, do you want to, do you want us to sell the building? Okay, I don't want to sell the building. And unless, somebody could object to our mixed use and, okay, well, what do you want me to do, sell it? I guess I'll take that feedback, but I don't want to offer an either or branch tree logic on that. And then I'm also not fully inclined to say, do you want it to be all amenity, library type services? Because of course people are going to say, yes, I don't want to, I'd love for us to have it. I personally love to have a 15,000 square foot library. We can't afford it. We can't support a 15,000 square foot library in this community. So it's just not going to happen. But we can support a 4,000 square foot library annex, I think. And so I want to kind of steer, so I'd like to sort of talk tonight around what other people's vision is for the building, and then try to steer the engagement process towards validation of the vision, completing the vision, instead of super high level public use or private use.
So while mixed use is definitely what I would personally lean to, I disagree that it's the only one we can feasibly do. I really liked the way that staff laid out the options here for that first engagement, where specifically they're saying, all right, do you want it to be community, private, or shared? Community is the highest fiscal impact, up to $750,000 a year. I think we could improve upon that by, anybody can throw out $750,000. What does that really mean? I would love to see what does that mean on an individual household or individual person basis. But I think if we can go out and say, do you want it to be community use? It's going to cost your house, obviously making this totally up, but if we say it's going to cost your house $1,000, I think that gives people something to react to. I think maybe it's something where we say, yes, we want this, even if it comes at a high cost. But I would like to see the community help decide that, rather than us just saying, nope, we can't afford it. I think we can, it's just a question of, do the taxpayers want to pay for that?
And just to be clear, in case people are listening, we're not asking for a tax increase.
Correct.
Is that what you're proposing? I lost you a little bit there. Are you just saying, like, if we had to somehow come up with a way to fund this $750 per year, you're talking about building a revenue stream for operations, or you're just trying?
I'm just saying it's coming out of our town budget, which is taxpayer dollars.
How would we possibly pay, maybe enlighten me, I'm not trying to be smart. We can't afford $750,000. We've all seen the budgets.
We can't with our current budget.
So then you're suggesting we go into the taxes, but I thought Matt was correct. So you're suggesting taking the pulse of the community, whether or not we would go to the...
Yes.
For a vote?
Yes. Taking the pulse of the community of what would they like to see done with this.
To finance this building, we're already figuring out how to move $500,000. Is that correct?
It's in the budget, yep. Those assumptions are made. Yep.
So we're already in for about $500,000. Yeah. So the question is, where do you come up with this?
Right.
Another $250,000.
So I'm not saying that $250,000 comes lightly, but there is an avenue to get it if the community were to come out in full force saying, we absolutely don't want it to be mixed use.
No, and I agree with that. I mean, your statement, we could never afford it. We can afford whatever we want to. We can do whatever we want to do. It's just what is the will of the community? And
we can't afford it without going to the taxpayers.
Right.
That's correct.
Or cutting
something else.
Bunch of capital improvement projects that we
can't. But I want to be realistic here, right? I don't want to. This is the thing that makes me insane, right? Where we are at risk of wasting our time or the community's time. I want to be very respectful to the community's time. It is not feasible for us to have a pure public amenity in this building without raising our taxes or draconian cuts to our city budget, which would include a lot of the planned capital improvement projects.
I would agree with that.
Which is no different than what we were going to ask our residents to consider if we built a community center over at the sports stable. So I don't want us to say we're not gonna, we're gonna throw that off the table, because we were willing to make that consideration when it was gonna be a $25 million building that we were gonna build. So I really hate to have us say, oh, nope, we gotta go mixed use. Are we only willing to consider that now because we're not building a $30 million building?
Well, I thought there was, I thought, and maybe that's why I wanted to talk about it, I thought the pulse was to try to do this without going, and I would be careful with my words, that there was no appetite for a voter initiative. I thought we had taken the pulse and there wasn't much of an appetite for a vote. I know I don't have an appetite for a voter initiative. That doesn't mean I want to slam something like this through without public engagement. I want to be able to bring something through with very active public engagement that is something that the community can afford without either a tax increase through mill levies or sales tax increase or draconian cuts. Because to me, I'm not interested in those three things for this building. I don't want draconian cuts, I don't want a mill levy increase, and I don't want a sales tax increase.
The issue with tax, the issue with the vote on this deal is we can't have it ready for November, and we can't wait until November of 2020. It's just, the timing just does not line up, and you can only do these in November.
And you'll see, preliminary budget's pretty close to being done. We have our big group staff meeting on it. You'll see, we have made no assumptions on a private entity being in the building, just because that's the most conservative approach. And we're able to buy the building and operate it within this 5-year budget. So we've made that work, and still able to get capital projects done that need to get done over that 5-year period.
Are we doing what? Are we doing fewer capital projects? Are we assuming higher revenue over those years? Or where's that?
There's a couple of things. So in 2022, we have additional revenue coming from the Superior Marketplace to the town, so that helps, and that kicks in. And then the other thing is the streets project is the biggest line item in the capital improvements project budget, and that's been reduced slightly, but not significantly.
So one of the concerns that I have with just the discussion here that we're proposing to have with the community is, we've had these discussions before, right? Like we had this discussion with the rec center, we had this discussion with the civic space, community space, a survey that went out back in whenever it was, 2013, 2012, 2014, I don't know. And I think we're going to hear a lot of the same answers, right? Like some people really want a library, and some people are going to really want to have, maker space, and some people are going to really want to have senior services, and some people are going to really want to have, areas for teens to just hang out and, teen space. And, all of these are good ideas and have merit, some better than others, but ultimately this is, to Kevin's point, right? We got elected to make decisions, and we're going to have to make a tough decision with this. We already did, and now we're going to have to execute on this. So I think that the way that I look at this project, and I'm really excited about this project, and I think that this could be kind of like the crowning achievement of my time on the board if we deliver on this thing really well, is to think about it from the perspective of how can we make this as popular as it can possibly be, right? Like, we want to get users in this building, right? We want to get people who are actually going to be using it on a day-to-day basis. And, so we need to think about, like, okay, well, who's our target audience? And, so I met with Shanti from the Rock Creek School, and she's really excited about this building. And, that's the sort of, target audience, because, her school's right next door, and we have amenities that are desirable for her to bring her students to. We should be thinking about, okay, they're going to be regular users of the space, and we should be designing it in a way that, it's going to get used in the highest and best use for the property. So, I think that this engagement process is going to be really, and it'll be fun to go through and hear the ideas, but I think we're going to hear a lot of the ideas that we've already heard that we're expecting to hear. And ultimately, it's going to come down to finding the right architect who has the right vision for actually designing something here that's going to be really spectacular. Then finding a partner who is actually going to be, in there on a day-to-day basis, so the town isn't responsible for the day-to-day operations of this facility. Like there's no need for us to reinvent the wheel if there's people out there already driving. And there are these types of amenities, out in other communities down in Denver, up in Boulder, and so we need to identify what those are, what sorts of amenities they have in the spaces that, we're kind of drawing from for inspiration, and then kind of design it that way. But, when you're talking about, Kevin, in terms of, visioning for this thing, what do I see? What do I want to see? And I want to hear what the community says. But I want to see a place that, for all the people who work at home, who are telecommuting these days, someplace for them to gather during the work week, during the day, to go there, have a cup of coffee, and do work, right? So like a co-working space, right? I also want to see a place that attracts students on days when Eldo K through 8 has late start Wednesdays in the morning, so they're not all just congregating at Starbucks and getting them over fire code. A place that attracts them, so that would include both quiet study space, large gathering space, large tables kind of like this, but then also study rooms. And then also like a play area that has like pool tables and ping pong tables and foosball tables, gathering space, meeting space. That co-working space, that kind of library annex study space can kind of double as that main area in that front room where they have the showroom, would be great for meeting space. And then, programming, lots of, different types of studio space, for all the bays in the back and for the loft up top, and that's really where I see kind of the architect having the vision to, convert a lot of that stuff. I think it makes sense for us to use some of the space for town office space for ProStack and well, not ProStack, but for Parks and Rec. But that's really what I see, and then senior space as well. Some sort of amenity which can be kind of in the whole library annex. Some of the programming that's going to go on in some of the rooms, converting them into classrooms. Different types of studios for arts, for technology, coding, for computer classes, things like that. But this is not necessarily something that should be driven by the town in terms of programming. This should be something that I think really should be driven by a third party. This is kind of the business that they run, and that we can benefit from their experience, their expertise, and leverage that. So, we're not trying to figure it all out, so we're not having to staff up to support it all. And that we can enter into some form of long-term lease with them to deliver an amenity that people really want to go to and use. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I think we're going to get informed from the outreach. I think we're really going to get informed from the architects.
I agree. I think the importance, I think that's well stated. I think Matt, I don't know if you could speak to your process to select an architect, whether or not it'll be a formal RFP or you'll just have to invite people in to.
It'll be a formal RFP, but we'll also contact certain firms that we know have done these type of projects for other cities.
So are we saying that we do want to go ahead with this first step of the engagement process that staff recommended? I mean, I'm not of the belief that this should be 100% community use. I'm just saying, I don't want us to just throw out that idea. If we heard resounding from the community that they want to do it, I actually believe the shared use is the only viable way we're going to do it. But if that's what we believe as a board, and it sounds like there's 3 of us right now that believe that, because we've all sort of said it. You know, is that where we really want to see staff focus their time, is doing that? We don't need to ask this private use, community use question, because we believe this is sort of the right way to go, and then get the feedback from the community of, do you agree with us that this is the right vision for this building? Because I just don't want us to do this step and delay it. And I know you've got a survey out there right now that's sort of asking the question, but if we're sort of the opinion that we really think this is the best way to go, shouldn't we just try and do that?
Yeah,
And see what kind of a thing the architect could come up with this for a vision, because it's a whole lot easier to talk about a vision than to just have people go, well, I think you ought to sell it because I don't want you to keep that 3.8 million on the books. And that's not what we really bought it for, because I think at least 3 of us have a vision of what this building could be for the community.
And to be clear, even as I'm saying, ask the community, I think mixed use is going to be what we will want to do. More just wanted to keep all of our options on the table. Based on everything we're saying now, I mean, given that it sounds like a majority of the board does prefer the shared use, I have to agree with Sandy. I think if that's going to be the case, then let's move forward with what should that shared use look like, rather than spending time asking about these other options. I mean, I think the less confusing we can be, the better. And also, I think, I'd like to hear from everyone, are we aligned that we'd like to try to open this as soon as possible? I think we've discussed that a little bit, but I would really like to see it open next year, even if it's we're opening it as mixed use now, and in a couple of years, the community comes back and says, no, we really want to not have a business there, we really want it to be full community space, and then we can make longer term decisions around it. But I'm okay with kind of the near term approach of, for opening, it will be mixed use.
That's a good point. And, it can change over time,
Right.
depending on what the pulse of the community is. I like the shared use too. I like the idea of having a sense of direction, because I think if it's just too much of a blank canvas, it's just going to get bogged down into a little bit of everything and a lot of nothing.
Right.
And so I like this. I like this shared use path. I think we probably take the private use component off the table. The full community use, I agree. It's probably just too far of a stretch for a lot of reasons. So I think we go down that path, and with the idea that, hey, I think that's a great point. Is it can be changed over time. If we just decide we don't need co-working space anymore, don't need the whatever private entity in there, then we can grow into that space. And I agree with getting it open as soon as possible. I think long term, I still want to see this type of facility in downtown. I will always believe that, but in the interim, we do need space, and we need it right now, and this could fill that gap until such time as downtown has something.
I think I really appreciate that, and I agree. I want to support downtown as well, and I think they're going to serve different purposes. I think downtown is, going to be the date night destination. It's going to be the family destination, and I think that's great. I think what we could do here may be, the Tuesday night destination. It may be where you're working from, 2 to 7, and you show up at 2 and you have a coffee, and that transitions into something else, and then maybe you grab a taco from the food truck that visited that day while your kids are wrapping up their homework club. So I think it's a different use. I do want to have a conversation around library services, because I want to be respectful to our neighbors, right? I also have a vision that we have some type of library services. And when you talk to people today and you talk about library, and they say, library, what's that? Book lending, who needs book lending? But library services means something different entirely. And so I think Patrick, I wish he was still here, has already started looking at other communities and what their library services will look like. And library services mean, it's not just a couple of desktops it's those, it could be the co-working space, it's the homework space, it's, offices. It could be a place where we have books that are, maybe we have some books in there. So it is in some aspect a lending library. It's maybe where books are delivered. But we have a library partnership with Louisville where I think we could bring tremendous value to Louisville, where we heard from them, when the library director came to us a couple months ago now, or 6 weeks ago, and clicked through the what she wished she had. I think we have the opportunity to check a lot of those boxes for her. And so I don't want to be having those conversations around a library annex without Louisville being participatory towards those, because we have some cost sharing. So I personally would be supportive of engaging Louisville early in this process, getting their feedback for what that library services might look like, understanding that the dollars that we send over the highway would have to be some or all of them would have to be leveraged for this. And I don't want that to be a surprise to them, because that's the way I'm thinking, and I think it makes sense. And if other people think that makes sense, I tend to think, they may see that as, if they heard about it later, they'd see that as bad news. And I actually think this is really good news for the partnership.
And I actually think they're thinking that way too. Sharon actually came to the the placemaking meeting last Tuesday, and I know Daryl McCool started to have some conversations with her about creative ways to bring libraries. So I think our new director of the library is very open to that and is looking to work with us on it. She knows this building is sitting over there as an opportunity source for her too. So I agree, and I think there's some revenue that we could help with this building, with keeping that money in town.
About 2 or 3 years ago, we had a presentation, the board had a presentation from a library person from Adams County, I believe. It was a great presentation about the future, what the library said, those that are good with unearthing archived past meetings, maybe find that. We individually watched that video presentation because it was it covered a lot of those same points. Here's what's going on in the future library, the new libraries of today. Here's the components that you would want. So we had all that laid out for the board, and it was a great presentation. I want to say it was 3 years ago, so which would outdate all of you.
So I think good. Maybe we could use the
28, 2015. That sounds about right.
That sounds about right.
I was going to say, I do remember it happening. It was that meeting that was sitting on
You
Ben's
may
side.
have been.
Yeah.
So Matt, I don't think we need to worry them or engage, I think maybe that's just the heads up that, as we think about the, what goes in this building, library services is one of the building blocks that will be considered, and we want them to be part of the conversation, not left out. We're not going to tell them what we're doing. We want them, it's a collaboration.
Yeah. And they always expected this, it was going to come through downtown Superior anyways. That was always the thought process too. So whether it's downtown Superior or the south end of Superior, I don't think that's going to be a surprise to them whatsoever. It's just a question of what the relationship can or might look like over time.
So that presentation was September 28th, 2015 that was referring to.
See, it does pay experience on this board.
Sean Madey's engaged citizens to rescue.
All the best.
That's fine.
So I'm also on board with everybody else. I think a mixed use makes sense. So I think at this point, it makes sense to pivot to a different conversation. What value do we see from the community engagement we have over the next month? Are we talking about the specific amenities we want in there? I mean, Mark gave us a great vision. I think we all have our own visions. What do we want to hear from the community? What's going to push us in the direction we need to go?
I personally I'm not, you'd have to convince me that any type of digital engagement is the right medium in this right now.
What do you want to hear? What are you trying to get?
I think it was probably Clint who, I think when I was first elected, Clint Bobby Beard said,
half the people are going to love you and half the people are going to hate you. That's, welcome to politics, right? I mean, welcome to life on the board. It's what's going to happen. This is something that's really interesting happening here. Like, there's a lot of people that are really unhappy with this and super worried, and I'm a little worried, right? This, this is a huge decision, but this has like such opportunity. There's a lot more people that are excited about the opportunity side, and so I think sometimes when you engage people in a screen, it just they don't see the way Mark lights up talking about the vision and his passion. They don't hear, the frustration in somebody, those of us that have, preteen daughters who are spending, too much money at Starbucks, and it's not where we want them to be. If there was something in the community that was there, and I think you're going to lose that with digital engagement, and you lose your ability to deliver the message, and maybe worse, the message back is clouded with all this noise instead of true engagement. Like I think we have the I think the community needs to kind of come out and engage. And of course they could send emails, right? Mm-hmm. And we're not good, but I tend to think like a online survey here. We're just not going to get the survey right. It's going to be very kind of black and white, and it's it doesn't feed off that oh, somebody moved the wait a minute, if we have this makerspace, why is the makerspace on this side of the building? Maybe it's on that side. And, I love the idea of a public garden, and the public garden might be able to feed into, maybe the food trucks are using this. So how does the food truck get access to, the tomatoes that are being grown if it's all the way on the other side of the building? That's the type of collaboration you're going to get if you bring people into, this room is too small, but bring people into the virtual room. Maybe you bring people into the actual building itself to have that type of engagement. So I'm really excited about kind of the physical engagement. The digital engagement, to me, I'm just not interested in this one. So outside of, hey, what do you think? But the concept of a survey, I feel like it's going to get away from us.
So again, you're looking for help us figure out what amenities go in, where they go, and just let kind of free-flowing conversation unfold.
Yeah, it's just, I think we've all been, for those that were in Mitchell's sessions, right? And you see what a professional facilitator can do. And frankly, his sessions were interesting because, a lot of what we got out of the session was very aligned with, the community's needs were very aligned with kind of what we're thinking, and maybe that's not a coincidence, right? But we didn't get lost in, nobody's saying, oh, just, what you should do is just sell the building. Right. That's not going to come out in a public engagement session. So, and again, the first thing, I don't know, not really, hate to be the 12-stepper, but I feel like, the first step in this 12-step rehabilitation is acknowledge we have a problem, right? And we've got a little bit of a problem in the community right now with just naysayers coming after us, right? And let's just acknowledge that. And okay, we're part of a community, and it's 4 square miles, and it's amazing. Just about everybody that lives here loves it here. So let's use what they love about the community and recognize that we're all really good people who are trying to do what's best, and let's make the right decision. And a digital engagement platform, just to me, isn't going to do it.
So I think the in-person engagement is definitely ideal to get people building off each other's ideas, like happened in Happy City. But that said, I'd be really disappointed if we took out the digital engagement entirely. I think we need to give people a forum to speak up that's not, block time out and come here on Tuesday night, because not everybody has that luxury.
Well, what's I guess I want to hear about, I like this, I even like the name Bang the Table, right? Because that's what I want. Mm-hmm. It's a physical, and if they're running surveys that are the manifestation of the physical, banging the table, I like that. I just, but if this is a Survey Monkey designed by one of us, and while I really appreciate kind of the thoughts that have been put in here, I guess I want to hear what Bang the Table thinks about for their engagement process. And if that was in my packet, I may have missed it.
No, it wasn't, no. Staff's been looking into different platforms for the survey, and we just made the decision today.
Yeah, and Bang the Table is the same thing that the city of Louisville used for the airport
correct.
survey. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think a really good points made by everybody tonight about this. You know, I think the engagement process, to me, serves a couple, potentially a couple different purposes, right? If what we're doing by whether it's, a survey and or a community meeting where we're actually trying to take the pulse of the community, if what we're trying to do is get ideas that, we're not necessarily thinking of, that's one way to go about doing the survey, right? You're gathering information. And I had no idea that so many people really wanted a welding studio, but we want to do a welding studio. Apparently we've got a lot of people that love welding. But if what we're trying to do is, and I don't know how this is going to pan out. I have my suspicions that I think we're going to hear a lot of the same things and ultimately have to make the executive decision of this is what it's going to look like based on the architects who are coming forward with the design. So if what we're really trying to do here is educate the community, build up excitement, get buy-in to this concept, which I think is really valuable, then I'm in agreement with you, Kevin, and I think that's kind of what you're going for, is that what we need to do is sell people on the vision, right? But right now, we don't really have a clear vision, and I think we may be putting the cart before the horse. We don't want to, I think, prematurely sell people on something that all of a sudden turns out to be economically unfeasible. We can't deliver it, and it's just not going to be realistically, because we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver here. So I think part of this is going to depend on having the architect, once we have the architect visions and an architect selected, then we definitely need to be doing some engagement with the community and saying, look, this is what it's going to look like. This is going to be amazing. But if the purpose of the outreach right now is more kind of general, hey, we're looking to identify what the vision is going to be. We have some ideas. We want to hear from your ideas, but we're really excited. And I think that's kind of the direction we go, rather than trying to build consensus around, what specific amenities everybody wants in the space. And then in terms of, with the digital outreach, I don't think there's any harm in doing some digital outreach about, soliciting ideas. What would you like to see? What would you find to be most useful? But I think they need to be really kind of general usage questions, and not try to get too specific.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I've struggled on the digital is because to me, it's so, the ability to be negative on the screen, it's challenging. Second, a couple of our most recent digital engagements, where we had professionals came out with, well, no, they weren't always professionals, sometimes they were just volunteers, but it was, half and half. Even when you go back to well done, it wasn't, when you really expand the lens a little bit and look outside the, that, and I don't want to bring up well done, I'm not trying to raise that, but as an example, when you look at the Northwest engagement, it was half and half, the sub-area planning. So I don't want a half and half on this one.
But I don't think we're looking to do a survey per se. I think where the strength comes in with Bang the Table is something where it's like people putting in their ideas and people saying, yes, I like that one, no, I like that one. And if I see these results, I'm not going to necessarily say, oh, that one got 10 votes and that one got 9, therefore we go with the one that has 10. I see it more as just great idea generation, the same way we would get in the Happy City workshop.
I just want to be really careful. And if Bang the Table has a digital engagement tool that is fantastic, the first I heard their name was today, so I think that's great. I don't want to do a survey monkey, and I think we got to be, like, in my view, we as a group can't get out there enough at the barbecues and the swim meets and talk about, and maybe talk less, listen more, right, which I'm trying to do. Probably not so good tonight. And if that's what these guys can help us do, listen, then I guess I'm all for it. I'm very aware of kind of the survey fatigue as well.
Well, I think what we need to do then is I haven't looked at what this bank table group has done before in terms of what their platform looks like and how.
And I'll add, they have a lot of different options as you browse through the site. I'm just looking through now, but.
So that's great. I think what we need to do is be mindful of kind of how we ask the questions. Right? If you ask the question, should we do this? Do you want that?
Right.
People are going to say, no, like, what the hell are you doing? And
Right.
some people are going to say, yeah, absolutely. But, if you ask them what do you want? And like you actually tell them, all right, I'm looking for constructive suggestions here in terms of the amenities that you're actually going to use, then they feel like they're part of the process. And I think in the past, like, do you want us to spend $20 million in a rec center attached to the sports table? People are like, what are you guys, nuts? Do you want us to go to the voters and ask for it, or should we just try to find and fit it into the budget? You guys are crazy, we're going to recall all of you. But, if we ask, what specific amenities are you looking for here? And like, what are you going to get the most value out of? Co-working space?
So I think we're reinventing the wheel a little bit in that those are the questions that town staff put in the second engagement. What type of community uses would you desire in this space? What types of businesses or organizations would you desire? Or what types of businesses or organizations would strengthen the Superior community? So going back to what Sandy had pointed out earlier, I think we've agreed we want to skip that first engagement. Are we okay to go ahead with this second engagement?
Or, just a thought, would the board prefer to go out right away, bid out for an architect, have them submit, we would require them to submit kind of their vision for the building as part of their proposal, have some open houses just to get people in there, look at the building, not really any specific, just as we bought this building, come take a look at it, and then once the architect's hired, start the engagement process.
Yeah, my answer is yes. And I feel like we could do a one-pager. And let me try to articulate what I think the outline is, which is, we desire a multi-use community amenity. The multi-use community amenity will have some commercial entity associated, which will be a draw for, families and people of all ages, right? So, and for inspiration, to see the place in Longmont, whose name, and I can't even find it, the place in Longmont, or Rayback Collective, or the one in Denver, Improper City, or the Patrick heard about one in Florida. There's hundreds of these, right? No, maybe not hundreds, but there's for inspiration of these multi-generational things, see this. Yet we also desire, the following three things. We want to include library services. We were informed around the future of a library on, from this company, see this company. We also desire a, some type of co-working space. I think that would be next part. I think co-working, my priorities are commercial usage, co-working, library services, and then layering in some additional community amenities, whether or not it's makerspace, I'm never exactly clear what that is, or, community gardens, or cloud kitchen, I like that concept, or things like that. Those are, to me, a little bit more on the periphery, but laying that concept out in the one-pager, and then allowing the architects to see the building and come back with their own inspiration. To me, that feels like the appropriate right next step. And then if I think it, maybe it's informing the community less, I don't know. I don't want to, there's the balance here is doing our job and operating quickly, yet engaging the community and not getting too far over our skis that people will say, what do you, to your point, what are you guys, nuts? That's not what we want.
Yeah, I'm kind of receptive to sort of allowing this to play out a little bit. I mean, I think we're going to be limited. This is only 50,000 square feet. There's only a finite amount of things that we can and can't do with it, and sort of working with the architect on, here's the things that we'd like to go do with it. You know, here's the limitations on the building given the way that it's designed, with all the concrete and so on and so forth. And I think working that into the mix is going to be critical.
Well, it's a big, so what I should have said, to me, this building has a lot of outdoor usage
Fair enough.
associated with it as well.
Yeah.
So it's a 15,000 square foot building, but it's a huge piece of property. And even somebody thinking about the traffic flow, where are cars coming in and out of. And we do have a school and a Starbucks and a drive-through, and
It's already a hairy intersection.
right, it's already a little clunky. And so,
Yeah.
if you're gonna, these new places that I'm talking about have just a tremendous amount of outdoor space.
So I think I appreciate the direction we're talking about now more than where we were before. I think bringing something that is tangible, that the community can wrap their mind around, will get us better results, especially because we don't know how to activate all the spaces yet and what we can't do. I mean, we're going to have a million different things people want to do. So let's actually see what's possible, then show it to the community and get their feedback from there and let that drive where we go. So I'm in favor of flip-flopping the decide on use, or just bid out the architect, get a conceptual design from them, and then going to the community engagement piece.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to rush out too soon because we're going to get the smorgasbord. I want all these things, which we're going to be stuck trying to figure out how to wrap our heads around that and what the architect can actually deliver.
But I think we run into, I wasn't on the board, but I watched you guys last year with the rec center, and ultimately you ended up trying to...
It just kept growing, right?
Exactly.
It just kept growing and growing. It's like, at a certain point, you completely run out of space, and you cannot satisfy all the needs. So, you bring up a good point. 14,000 sounds like a lot of space, but it's not a lot of space. Yes, there's outdoor space, but it's limited use. So for building envelope space, we've talked about a lot of concepts here. I think we ought to having the framework of an architect to say, okay, you carve out your event space here, and you kind of put your gotta-haves in there, and then, here's what you're looking at. I think that's a lot more meaningful conversation to have with the community than what do you want in this space, in this blank sheet of canvas. That's a good suggestion.
I'm really good with that.
Yeah.
I really am good with that. And I think, I think social, thanks for finding Bang the Table. It's great that these guys are actually moved their headquarters to Boulder, right? So, and I think, telling them what our plan, if they think that's a terrible idea, or maybe maybe there's another work session with the 7 of us and the Bang the Table guys, right? Where they're, if their expertise is community engagement, I suspect they're pretty good at team engagement too. So,
Are they actually a consultant that helps with engagement, or are they just a platform? Sorry, I'm opening it up right now.
I believe they're just the digital platform, but...
Oh, really?
They also have
Yeah.
consulting
Do
services.
they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And I don't know them, just what I'm seeing on the website right now.
Okay.
All right, good discussion. Anything further on that? All right.
I think the last question, it sounds like all of us were on board, but we're all on board with that 1-year timeline, right? Get this done and get a use in there as soon as possible.
So, yeah, I'm good with that. Just point of clarification. So, I agree that I think it's a good idea to start with the architects, first. In terms of identifying who those architects are, Matt, that you're going to be specifically reaching out to, in addition to the actual bidding, can you let us know kind of the list of who you're talking about? And then if anybody has suggestions as to, architects that they're familiar with that they think should be involved in the process, let's make sure that they're not omitted from this.
Yeah.
And then in framing the actual RFP and the bid, I think we should see what it looks like in terms of what's going out to the architects to make sure that everything, I don't want to micromanage too much, but this is a really important step in the process, and I want to make sure that when the architects are seeing it, this is something that the board has buy-in on. So can you just make sure that we're consulted on, you know, the points that are being made for the bidding process? And like to that end, also like, I think it would be helpful for everybody to compile a list of, you know, inspiration points, if for nothing else, just to educate the board. So if you're familiar with, you know, this place in Florida or whatever, and just let's put together a running list of these are the types of
This place is
facilities,
fine,
like
right? It's a great idea.
Union Station, Rayback Collective, you know, Stanley Marketplace, and Lowry, you know, the Source, you know, all these types of places. And then while we're going through that, let's figure out who the architects are for all of those places and invite them to participate in the process.
And then I don't know if we need to decide here or agree on the parallel path in terms of, you know, removing all the dealership stuff, letting pros move into the building. I mean, I have no problem with any of that. I don't think we need the 12 lifts that are in there. I don't know that, you know, anybody who's ever going to use that facility needs those lifts. Moving that out makes sense to me. Letting pros move into one place, one building, that we can actually find them all. I think that'd be great.
I asked the neighbor that works up in the Dodge dealer, I said, are those lifts worth anything? And what he told me, when they moved out of their building into the one in Boulder, they ended up just putting all their lifts on Craigslist, and it was, you know, $1,000 per lift. You come and take it, and they didn't have a problem getting people to pay them the $1,000 to get rid of the lifts. He's like, if you hire someone to get rid of the lifts, it's going to cost you a ton of money, but there's plenty of, you know, second-tier body shops in places that need a lift. And, you know, what we heard from, you know, from those guys was, you know, if you guys want to use those lifts for your own commercial vehicles, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars to get them working again. These guys figure it out, right? So anyway, so I don't know if that's a good data point, and I can introduce you to Ty, and, you know, he can walk you through that process, but that's what I heard, that for $1,000 you'll get rid of the lifts.
Pay for our new slackline pole.
And I heard somebody actually has a lift in one of their garages in Rock Creek, by the way. So,
It's one of our neighbors.
yeah. So if anybody wants a lift, it has $1,000.
Didn't one of your neighbors want one in his garage
Oh,
too?
no problem.
I'm gonna get you in trouble.
Okay, good discussion. So the challenge coin was in the other category. And
So happy about this.
Very,
Brings me joy.
very pleased with how this turns out.
Looks
I think
great.
Melissa on staff did an amazing job kind of spearheading the effort, and then the Youth Leadership Council. They were instrumental in kind of going through the different designs and coming up with the final product. I think I've told you all this story. This, you know, kind of what inspired this idea was my invitation to sit with the family of the slain deputy at the sports table. They were doing a charity game, and it was like, what can we give them as a kind of memento of the town? And water bottles and blankets didn't seem to be quite the best fit. And the sheriff's office had the challenge coin, and once we looked into it, it's like, well, towns can have them too. I mean, it's kind of a military origin of them, but the law enforcement has them. Towns can have, anybody can have a challenge coin. So it was not a very high-cost endeavor, and I think it's a special token that we can give out when it seems appropriate. And so we didn't have any kind of draft of the criteria, so I took my best stab at creating what could be some criteria for distribution, but it's merely a starting point. I have no boundaries, no expectations on that. I don't want it to be a mayor thing. I want it to be a town thing. I think if the town manager has an occasion to want to award one to someone, I think that should be the discretion of the town manager. I think the board, I think we ought to put some guardrails on it. I mean, we don't want to just we're throwing them out kind of willy-nilly, and don't want maybe individuals like, oh, my kid did a great job, or my neighbor kid did a great job mowing the lawn, or they get one or something like that. So I think we want to put have it be a very special thing. So that's the background.
So, I love it. I mean, the design is just phenomenal. I mean, everything about it just came out fantastic. Love the idea, love everything about it. Since other towns have them, are there, did you happen to look to see if other towns had any criteria that were set up? Right. I mean, I don't think we need to necessarily set the criteria tonight, but I think having some type of framework, and, you know, as I said, I just don't want to be put in a situation where, you know, sometimes it's hard when you have more applicants, for example, on the committees, then, you know, it's like you're so grateful to get anybody that wants to volunteer for the town, and now you're selecting, you know, one person over another to volunteer for a committee, and I don't want this to feel like it's a competitive thing. So, I don't quite have that worked out in my brain. So.
Yeah, and I kind of didn't want it to be, I mean, yes, we might have some criteria, but I wanted it to be something spectacular, that because you became this didn't automatically mean you were going to get a challenge coin. That was, you know, it felt a little bit, it seems like they're a little more spontaneous, but with criteria.
Right.
Does that make sense? So that was kind of where I was trying to, and I did go out and do a Google search to see if I could find municipal challenge coins and see if I could find any criteria, and I couldn't. But I only had about 5 minutes to spend on it, so it's not saying they don't have them. But it just, I don't know, for me, my sense is that there's something that's a little bit more out of the ordinary as opposed to a standard run-of-the-mill. If you achieve this, you get this. And that's where, for me, it was kind of like, let's make it, if you get one of these, it's actually really pretty cool that you got it.
It's like the key to the city.
Like the key to the city, that's exactly right. But I mean, that kind of thing, you know, towns never used to just give out the key to the city to anybody. They gave it to the guy who played on the, you know, team that was from their town, but there were only 12 players in the whole country, or kind of things like that. So, and Matt probably didn't want us to give away the key to the city, because then everybody would be able to come in and hang out in town hall. But, you know, for me, that's where it's sort of set criteria, and I didn't have time to get my mind around it. But
can we just play it by ear for a little bit and see if it, you know, I mean, I like what, I mean, Clint's criteria, you know, there was I don't have it in front of me, but the last one was, you know, or other spectacular things that have been done, and I think
that was the biggest one. I mean, a lot of the things, we don't even know what they are. I mean, like this thing at the sports stable, I wouldn't have, you know, how do you write that down? There's no, but you just know it because that's the appropriate thing for that point in time. But I think there are some significant milestones that our residents can achieve in their lives, and I listed some of those out as, okay, maybe that's an occasion. You know, I mean, people that we think about, the people that we've recognized at the board level for one thing or another. I mean, if they're being recognized by the board, I think, to me, that's a pretty significant thing, and maybe to give them a.
So how many of these, so I have a number, we'll play this game. How many of these do you think we give out per year to members of the community?
How many do we have?
Oh, no, because that's
a different.
I think that's a closely held secret. So, how many do you think we give out per year?
I'd say 6 to 12.
I had 3 to 5 in my brain.
Yeah, I was gonna say no more than a dozen. Like, I wouldn't want more than one a month, roughly. Not saying we can't do 2 1 month.
Right. But then, but it's, you know.
But it wouldn't be standard that you give one a month.
No, I just mean that level of accomplishment.
But that's, so every other meeting, every 2 to 3 meetings, where, you know, is this something that's acknowledged in a meeting, or is this just in, you know, somebody's opening in their, you know, board level announcements? I want to, you know, thank Sally or congratulate Sally for being admitted to one of the service academies, and we wish her well. And by the way, she was her first recipient of a challenge coin, and then, you know, it just goes down the line like that. You know? Or do we expect people to come in to, congratulations?
No, I think it's a combination of just us having our ear to the community, to what's going on, and you hear about something. I mean, we had a friend that his son just achieved Eagle Scout, over the weekend, and, that I mentioned this, I want to have more discussion first, but, I mean, to me, that young man would be a candidate for it. I mean, I think of the Girl Scout equivalent, I mean, I think that's an appropriate, but I don't think it's something that, I don't want this to be you achieve, I think, getting to your point, I don't think it's you check off these boxes, you come get one. It's not really that. It's more of we're the listening board to the community. When we hear about important and impressive things and they meet our criteria in some way, then we invite them in. And maybe that's
Right. That means something, right. I do think, I'm not sure if you do, so for example, on that Eagle Scout, which congratulations to that Eagle Scout, I would expect that Eagle Scout to be a Superior resident, a Superior troop, and have done their Eagle Scout project to some benefit of the town of Superior or Boulder County.
That's a good company too.
So that would be.
I don't know the answer to
Right.
that.
So if the Eagle Scout, for example, we help build a bridge in Denver, like, I think he's fantastic, and I appreciate that, but.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I was thinking it was something that was significant within the town of Superior
Yes.
as opposed to,
Right.
I
know,
like the
I
quality.
mean, maybe if you were on the Stanley
Yes.
Cup team that won the national, no, because that's not really the town of Superior. What we're talking about is people who
Right.
made a difference in
No,
the
it's a-
town of Superior.
I would also really like to see if we could put, maybe it's on the website, just a list of who's gotten them, why did they get them. I think it'd be great to have an inventory of that.
It's a good idea.
That's a great point.
It should be, what would be important to me, I think we've all been awarded something at some point in our lives that as adults, many years later, we still have, right? This to me, I would want, if we give this to an 18-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 25-year-old, it's something that goes into a drawer and then they find it 4 years later with fantastic memories of and keeping this, it's sitting on their desk and they're keeping it. It's special, right?
I would also like to propose, I would really like it if we at least invited recipients to the board meeting to receive it.
Yeah.
Not saying they have to show up, but I think there's something much more special about
No, absolutely.
giving it to someone versus just getting something in the mail.
Right. Clint's example of, let's not bring the grieving.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes there
are different circumstances,
Yeah.
but generally if it's someone from the town of Superior who we want to
Right.
recognize, I think it's totally appropriate that we would ask them to come in.
yes, for obvious recognition, but
Yeah.
at some point it might just be, right, somebody grieving and, here's something to
Well,
remember.
maybe we just have to sort of play it by ear
Yeah, I
for a
think so.
little while and just say, okay,
Yes.
this is the person, this amazing thing happened, and I think we really ought to recognize this person. Does the rest of the board agree? Hopefully, this is not something that then goes out in a public email when we get, a core request, but,
If it does, it does. Who cares?
but at least, then we could have a discussion about it. Does this seem
Yeah,
appropriate to you?
I think it should be the majority of the board, because,
Yeah.
an individual board member, even two, could say, I think these kids do great pulling weeds over there at the school, and well, that's.
Yeah, that's not really it.
Not it,
Yeah.
even though a board member might think that's a great idea, but I think it's the majority of the board, that's kind of the check and balance of the whole thing, so. Okay.
I think they turned out beautiful, though. They're really impressive looking.
I don't know if I deserve it, it's so cool.
You do. You've served your time. You're serving your time.
Right.
Just out of curiosity, is there any thought process? I mean, we use these in my office, and I'm familiar with how they're used within my industry. Is there any intent to open this up to town staff or other folks that aren't necessarily in Superior that will come in and make a difference for Superior? I mean, there's length of service award type things that, hey, you could do this as a meaningful thing. You've contributed X amount of years, and you've done a great job for our community. there's other ways to say thank you, but is this the same way to say thank you?
I think, if you think it's appropriate for like a long-term employee, like an employee milestone, a 10, a 15, not a 1.
45.
45.
No, 45.
Case out of it.
Let's just put a whole wall up.
Let's get a giant one made for Phyllis. Really big, gong.
Or we can just leave that up in the air, just
Right.
keep it general. Special achievements, recognize outstanding service, performance of duty, etc.
Okay. Anything else under other?
I had one other.
Okay.
And again, I was not on the board, and some of you may not be interested in considering it, considering the public outcry when it was discussed, but we recently received an email from a resident requesting that when the baskets come up for the upcoming women's disc golf tournament, that we leave them up for an extra 1, maybe 2 weeks. To me, it seems like a reasonable request. I think it brings a very short-term fun amenity to the town that might even spur some actual usage of our other one, and people have fun doing it. And 1 week or even 2 weeks doesn't seem overly burdensome to me for the neighborhood. But
It was only, I'll weigh in. It was only a week where those baskets were up there, and it just got communicated, like, the public can play for a day before the ladies come in, and I think that's great, and they can check the course, and I think that's great, and then hopefully the day after, the baskets are gone. But I think the neighbors made it really clear that we disrupted their way of life.
But I think-
Discs were in backyards.
But I think what happened was, there was an informal tournament that happened after,
And you're not going to prevent
you
that.
know, and that was the problem.
Right, you're not going to, it's going to
So
show up
if we leave
on-
them up,
We leave them up for a
could
week.
that happen
It's going
again?
to show up on, discgolf.com.
discgolf.com,
you know.
which is what happened last time. It ended up on a tournament site, and they ended up here, so.
So I think it's a great idea, but unfortunately, given the backlash, it was unpleasant. I'd rather.
And-
Nope, right.
And again, I didn't receive the emails, clearly I wasn't on the board at the time, but, I mean, the backlash didn't have to do with the fact that this was communicated as a permanent course going forward. I mean, it truly is that unreasonable to do it for a single week out of the year. I mean, this is something special that comes to town.
I remember it being more of, there was consideration of keeping them up longer term. That was what caused the backlash, was the thought of it being up longer term. I don't know if it was coincidence that, I got kind of caught in this circuit and attracted this whole bunch of other people, but I personally don't, I don't back up to it. I live very close to it, but I don't back up to it, so I can't speak to discs in the backyard, but I tend to agree. I think it would be fine for an extra week or so. I mean, maybe not.
Or even just through the weekend. I mean, right now with the current play schedule, the only time it's open to the public is a weekday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So that's not, I know the kids are out of school right now, but that's not ideal for any adults who might want to.
So whatever the board thinks, obviously, we'll go with, but the disc golfers that showed up a couple years ago, I'll just say it, they ruined it. And they were disrespectful to the community, they were drinking beer, they were leaving garbage. The residents of the community were worried about it as a safety issue. Our community was designed so neighbors are looking into neighbors' backyards, not people that they don't know coming and literally being feet away from your fence, investigating your backyard.
And they were going into people's backyards.
Right, and, people, we're a wonderful community, and people feel really comfortable with their doors open and dogs out, and we're just not designed to open up Purple Park and let in the neighbors. I think it would be a mistake.
Or if we leave it up for a week, and if we get complaints from the neighbors, we immediately take them down. mean, obviously it wouldn't be immediately,
Yeah.
but, I mean, I unfortunately won't be here, so I'm kind of bummed they're gonna come down. But, maybe if we just left them up a week and,
And because out of control, we take it down.
yeah, and if they were.
I'm fine with that solution. I mean, literally 5 hours tomorrow is the only time anybody here in Superior can go and actually enjoy this awesome pop-up amenity. And that just seems silly to me. I mean, as somebody, I mean, I don't do it anymore, but I got up at 5:30 in the morning 4 or 5 years ago so I could go and actually play on the course because it was impossible to do so otherwise. I know other Superior residents did the same thing, and I know others that couldn't meet that tiny time frame and never got a chance to actually enjoy this nice thing that comes into our town once a year. I mean, I understand that there are definitely concerns, and I'm very respectful to those, but we can at least try to find a balance so that Superior residents can actually enjoy this thing that comes to our town. And yes, there's the spectator piece that's also very enjoyable, and there's some amazing talent, but the actual going out and doing it so you're encouraging people to join the sport is important too. Yeah, I don't know how to find the perfect balance, but
I'm kind of the mindset of leave it up for a week, see what happens. You know, we had a bad experience. I agree with Clint in terms of his recollection. You know, to me, the whole disc golf thing seemed like it was kind of a surprise. Like I was like, oh, this is cool, and people were pretty excited about it. And then all of a sudden, you know, it was kind of organically like, oh, what if we converted Purple Park into a disc golf
so cool.
amenity? Because people were like, oh, this is cool. And then it turned out that there was, you know, blowback from the residents because, yeah, there were some bad apples and people overstayed their welcome and, you know, didn't respect, you know, the rules of the park and just common courtesy. Maybe it'll be different this time. And I think that's a reasonable suggestion from Sandy. If we have some complaints, we pull them out. But maybe we just message to the community that we're going to be leaving the baskets up for a week. They'll be open for use by the public. And then they're going to be removed, so they're not going to be a
Who
permanent.
sets up the baskets?
I don't think it's our staff. I think it's part of the
So
tournament.
that's the number one question, is that even an option? I mean, they might have another tournament, they gotta take the things out and go down the road.
Yeah, I'll have to follow up tomorrow.
So, yeah, I guess if it's.
it's not possible it's a smooth conversation.
Yeah. All right, anything else? All right, good retreat. We're done?
Cool.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, too.
Sorry.
Sorry, man.
It's not great news, actually. Patrick informed me today that he's accepted the Parks and Rec director job for the town of Erie. August 16th will be his last day.
So which day, what, 17th?
16th, it's Friday.
Holy.
I asked if there's anything I could do to keep him, but he's ready to move on, so.
Well, congrats, Patrick.
So we'll
Happy for him. He's not getting a challenge coin.
So,
But if he stays.
Right, yeah.
Did you offer
We will make it a chair of challenge coins.
Martin and I and our HR, we've got to figure out, for the transition, what we're going to do, but we'll be looking to replace him, so.
All right.
10 years. It's been here. 10 years.
9 years as well.
Yeah. So that was it.
Okay.